Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is Dedicated Hearts made Fullmetal in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 31, The Aftermath. Under the darkness of the night sky, a small section of wall rose was dotted with faint orange lights. A squad of garrison soldiers manned the walls, keeping a watchful eye on the gigantic ramp before them and the wide open spaces of Wall Maria for both the formation and wandering titans. Team leader called out one of the garrison soldiers, riding up onto the wall. Reinforcements have arrived and medical teams are on standby. Get more troops on the wall and have them on lookout, ordered Rico. See anything yet? Asked Rico to her subordinate, peering into their telescope. Nothing yet, sir, responded the garrison soldier. No sign of the expedition or any titans. Team leader called out another garrison soldier. The formation's been gone for a while now. Should we send a recon team to search for them? Rico took out a silver pocket watch from her side. She checked her watch and watched as the hand drew closer to 12 o'clock, close to midnight, she thought. She looked off to the side, into Wall Maria. A feeling of dread slowly began to consume her. Have a few teams ready to move. Without warning, a muffled bang caught their attention. The watchers rushed over to the edge and caught sight of a green line of smoke overlaying the distant moon. Formation's back, muttered Rico with a sigh of relief. Everyone into position. Watchers continue to keep an eye out for any titans. She ordered as the sound of dozens of horses galloping towards them grew closer and closer. Hurry up! Yelled the garrison soldiers, waving his hand towards the soldiers rushing over to the other side, over the enormous ramp. Get to the other side, we got medical teams on standby for the injured. A large flood of horses and men scrambled down into Wall Rose's interior. A disorganized mass of people congregated at the foot of the ramp as medical teams urgently tended to the wounded soldiers falling off their horses. Captain! Yelled Rico as she spotted Ian riding up the ramp. She lifted her torch up, signaling her location. Ian rode up to Rico. There was a blank look on his face as he climbed down his horse. Rico looked him concerned. What happened? She asked. Ian sighed heavily. Where to start? As his feet touched the ground from his saddle, Connie's fell to his knees and began sobbing. Overwhelmed by a feeling of shock and happiness over being alive, he quickly began sob into his hands. Fucking hell! He muttered. Nanaba quickly caught Historia as she collapsed from her horse. Historia! She yelled. Historia was limp in her arms, breathing heavily. I need some water. She called out to one of the medical teams. Edward slid off the saddle of his horse. His legs shook slightly as they touched the ground. He turned towards Alphonse and extended his hand out. Alphonse grabbed Ed and slid off the horse. Immediately Ed pulled in Alphonse for a hug. Al smelled terrible, but Edward didn't care because in this moment he was happy that he and Alphonse were alive. Mina collapsed onto the ground, sitting down while clutching the bloody piece of cloth wrapped around her arm. Ed and Alphonse walked up to her. Alphonse knelt down. Can I see the wound? He asked. Mina removed her jacket and then the bloody cloth covering her wound. Al clapped his hands together and gently placed his hands over the wound. Thinking back to Mai's lessons and his own research, he sealed the wound, stopping the bleeding. I stopped the bleeding, but you should still check with the medical team, just in case. Thanks, Al said. Mina. Ed extended his hand out to her, pulling her off the ground and onto her feet. Thanks back there, he said. Alphonse wrapped his arms around Mina, hugging her tightly. Thank you, he said. Mina hugged him back, resting her head on his shoulder. Armin stood next to Jean, staring blankly at the ground, while Jean sat down on the ground wiping the blood from his face with a wet piece of cloth. The 104th has some fickle luck, he commented. First we evacuate Wall Rose without casualties, then we get suddenly attacked by a Titan horde, and now all of us make it from an impromptu expedition. He looked down at the blood-stained cloth. Don't know what the hell was up with those Titans. Hands carried Mikasa towards the stretcher, Eren following closely behind. He laid her down gently. Here's something for that cut, said Hans, handing her a piece of cloth. Mikasa placed the cloth on the cut below right eye. Armin walked up to them and knelt beside Eren, placing his hand on Eren's shoulder. A single tear fell from Hans. You kids, he said, smiling. I'm so glad you made it. Erwin, yelled Hang as the commander fell to his knees, his body going limp. Come on, you bastard, don't go dying on me now, yelled Levi. His face shared the same look of panic as Hang. He quickly placed himself at Erwin's arm and tried to lift him up. Where's the damn medic? A small group from the medical team raced towards Erwin. they carried him off onto one of the carts. Injured soldiers were quickly hurried into carts. Most had bandages over different parts of their body while others either had to limp over or be carried towards the carts, missing either an arm or a leg. "Get moving!" yelled the driver. "We have to head to Trost, pronto." Sasha walked up to Connie and knelt beside him. "We made it," she muttered as she placed her arm around him, comforting him. "Come on you two," said Jean, standing over them. "Get up." He helped them both off the ground and onto their feet as the group of friends began to huddle together. Ed and Alphonse walked over to the 104th. Aaron looked around watching the carts full of injured soldiers being carried off to the districts and towards Historia, who was being tended to by Nanaba. A feeling of immense guilt began to creep up on him as the full weight of the sacrifice made in his and Alphonse's name bared down on him. "I got taken again," he said solemnly. "People had to die again because of me." "No," injected Alphonse, staring at the ground feeling ashamed. "This is my fault. I could have prevented this back at the house." He thought back to when he had his blade pointed at Reiner. "Should I have done it? Those men charged into the fray to save me." Ed placed his hand on Alphonse's shoulder, gripping it reassuringly. "How many people died?" asked Aaron, silently dreading the answer. "There was a bit over 100 of us, that's including the MPs, in the beginning," said Hang. As she walked up to them, 1/5 of our forces were injured or killed during Emir's surprise attack and a further 30% were killed during the actual rescue and charged towards the armored Titan. Hang paused for a second, allowing them to digest the information. "About half of our forces made it back, and of that half about less than a third got back unharmed. The scout regiment lost almost half of our veterans, which means, going forward, the bulk of our forces will have to be made up from the fresh recruits of the 104th intake." Both Aaron and Alphonse looked mortified at what Hang was saying. "Had it not been for Levi, Team 1 and you, Aaron, covering the charge, we may have suffered more casualties. Are we really worth all these sacrifices?" muttered Alphonse as he held his head in his hand. "The Titans didn't attack us on the way back," Armin mentioned. "They all just converged on Reiner. It's like Annie's Titan ability, but her scream only lured them towards her. This time it's as if something made them attack that Titan and Reiner." "Was that you, Aaron?" Hang stood a step forward and grabbed Aaron's shoulders. "Tell me everything," said asked with childlike curiosity in her eyes. "Aaron, you can control the Titans?" asked Edward. "Like the Beast Titan?" added Alphonse, looking up to face them. I have no idea," stammered Aaron. "All I did was punch a Titan in the face." "But you were fighting a whole bunch of them before," added Sasha. "Why's that Titan different?" "Listen, Aaron, Alphonse, Ed. I know it must be shitty to have the burdens of the world placed on your back, but in order to rescue Aaron and Alphonse, a little more than 50 people died in the process, and both the commander and Mikasa were gravely injured. You have to make sure that those sacrifices weren't in vain," declared Jean to the shocked faces of the 104th, as Jean gave a speech reminiscent of Aaron during the training years. "Erwin's attitude has really been rubbing off on the new recruits," remarked Hang. "Ever since you joined the Scouts, Jean, you've been real preachy." "Yeah, no," added Aaron, a small smile on his face. "Well, at least I didn't turn into a wavering crybaby," retorted Jean, slightly annoyed. "Yeah, are you really the same guy who wanted to throw in the towel back at Trost?" said Ed with a smirk on his face. "Are you really the same Jean who wanted to join the MPs?" added Sasha. "You really turned all serious and shit, Jean, it's kinda weird," commented Connie. "Still got that villainous look on your face though," added Armin. "Hey you guys, this is serious," replied Jean. "Don't worry, we get where you're coming from," said Ed as he bumped his fist onto Jean's arm reassuringly. "No matter how difficult things get, no matter how foolish we'll look struggling under the weight of our burdens, we have to keep living," he said, reciting Riza's words, "for the people you love, for the people who gave everything in our name." "You're right," Jean declared Aaron, much to the surprise of the 104th. "We can't hesitate, I can't hesitate. I'll control the Titans and I'll make Reiner and Berthold and do my part to make sure the deaths of our comrades help humanity's survival." "Seal Wall Maria?" asked Edward. "If you can control the Titans, you could give humanity the world," he jokingly suggested. "Some people would call you greedy," Ed, remarked Armin. A guy Alan I knew would say greed is just another form of hope, replied Ed. It should be said he had a warped sense of ethics though. Well, the guy was the literally called greed, added Alphonse, smiling as he thought back to the only homunculi they befriended. Heh, well let's get moving, said Hang. Edward, Alphonse, could you get rid of those ramps and dash? No. Yelled Historia, stumbling towards them deliriously. Don't get rid of them, we still need to get. Historia. Yelled Nanaba, reaching out to her. Hey, you shouldn't exert yourself, stated Sasha, concerned for Historia's well-being. Chris Historia, Armin corrected himself. Are you dash? We have to go to Wall Maria. She said, ignoring Armin. Historia, you shouldn't be stand-in dash. Before Aaron could finish his sentence, Historia grabs his shoulders. Don't worry about me. She yells, a look of panic on her face. We have to go back for Amir before she gets taken far away. You can do it, can't you? You can save her. Her head then snapped towards Edward and Alphonse. You can save her too, right? I saw you fight Reiner too, Ed, you both could dash. She let go of Aaron as she turned to grab onto Ed and Al. Instead she only collapsed onto her knees. Take it easy, advised Nanaba, you're exhausted. Historia, we just got back after taking heavy casualties, explained Hang. We don't have the manpower for another expedition, nor can we risk the very people we all put our lives on the line to save just a couple minutes ago. I'm sorry, but there's nothing we can do for Amir. This may not count for much, but Amir did seem to care about you a lot, said Alphonse as he thought back to Reiner's offer to her about Historia's protection. The reason she joined Reiner and Berthold in the beginning was solely because they promised to protect you. It was all she could think about. What was best was for you, added Aaron, but I can't understand why she would ever run off with them. Even in the end, Amir was a difficult person to understand, added Jean. Historia began to weep, tears rolling down her cheeks. How could she? Chose them over me, she cried. She told me we'd live for ourselves, that bitch, I can never forget her. The last comment caught her friends off guard. Was she always like this, or? Whispered Ed to Connie. No. Replied Connie. Christ, Historia? You're not acting like yourself, said Jean, concerned. Historia began to giggle softly, but very quickly she began to laugh uncontrollably. Myself. She laughed, that good girl Krista, I was never really her, she was just an act I made up to go along with the name they gave me. In the large stone hall of the military HQ in Hermina, the scout regiment held a memorial for their comrades who died during the Titan attack inside Wall Rose and the expedition outside into Wall Maria a week after the incident. They were all dressed in their long brown coats, those surviving members of the Southern Division of 104th Scout Regiment who were able to attend were there, many of whom were still covered in bandages, walking on crutches or being pushed on wheelchairs. Some were missing an arm and others their legs. The sound of weeping filled the hall as the people held each other looking at a large shrine adorned with the drawn portraits of their loved ones. Among the crowd of framed drawings and candles was a beautifully drawn portrait of Mike Zacharias, commissioned by Moblet. Your daughter was brave, said Nanaba to the weeping parents. She fought to the end, and because of that she saved her comrades. It was the same speech but with different words to tens of families wanting to hear about their child's final moments. Mike was always better at this, she thought. Thinking back to his last speech, she wondered whether she could live up to his legacy and make sure her comrades all stayed alive under her watch. But now there were family members who needed to be comforted. You were there, my son, was he brave? Asked crying mother. My brother did well, right? Asked the little sister. My sister helped humanity, didn't she? Asked an older brother. Edward and Alphonse stood with their back against the wall watching as the memorial carried on. Ed watched as a single scout who looked to be average height with blonde and extremely curly hair wept over the portraits of some of his friends while being comforted by Jean. Hey, you two! Called Hang, catching their attention. Oh hey, Hang! Replied Edward, how's the commander? We had to keep him under for a little while longer after the surgery, replied Hang. Thanks for the guidance of what kind of equipment we'd need. Don't mention it. Edward responded, though once he awakes you should tell him that the rehabilitation phase is going to be painful. I'll keep that in mind, said Hang, before she then walked off over to Levi, Lynn, and Gelger. How's Nanaba holding up? She asked. She keeps telling us she's alright, but I think with Mike's death and the suddenly becoming squad leader, she might just be holding it in. replied Lin. Did they find the body? Asked Hang. What was left of it? Said Levi grimly. A team found an arm and a mangled torso. It was near the training facility where the 104th rode off from, though they found the horse also, mangled as hell as well, like it was thrown at the building. So it's likely that Harry Titan did it then? Asked Lin. The bastard that led the attack on the castle. Added Gelger. Whoever this guy is, we need to take him down and soon. Said Levi. Levi flicked through the paperwork on Erwin's desk. With the commander still out of action, he took it upon himself to sort through Erwin's paperwork and documents. Ever since Walrose was secured a week ago, a pile of documents and reports continued to fill the desk. Levi took out a report from the folder, Aaron and Alphonse's reports. He skim-read through the reports detailing the events during their capture, the death of the family and the possible revelation of a civilization outside the walls. He placed the report over to the side and picked up a new folder, the regiment's budget from the central government and its allies. Levi expected to quickly read through the pages and expected to see the rise in funds after their promised increase from the government and their new merchant supporters. What the hell? Funding for the regiment seemed to have been decreased by the central government. He lowered the report and picked up one of the letters by one of their merchant supporters. Levi skim-read the contents. Dear Commander Erwin Smith, it is with great sadness that, to the Honorable Erwin Smith, I deeply regret to inform you. To the valiant Commander, I must inform you that I'm withdrawing my support. Different words, yet they all contained the same message. The Scout Regiment's new allies were withdrawing their support. This wouldn't have been a surprise to Levi. In the past, the regiment's high mortality rate and lack of success had starved them of investment and funding, but they'd only recently scored a victory against the Titans by capturing one of their shifters. The introduction of Aaron, Edward, and Alphonse into their ranks and still retaining the path to Wall Maria, the regiment was closer to victory than ever before. So why were they suddenly walking away? Without warning, there was a knock on the door, disrupting Levi from his thoughts. Come in, he said. The door gently opened, allowing Petra to walk into the office. She walked up to the desk and saluted Levi. At ease, Petra, said Levi. Did your family make it into Walsina okay? They did, thank you for asking, Captain, replied Petra. I'm sorry I couldn't be there to help you and the others during the attack, sir. Don't be sorry, you were injured, Levi responded, but you're here now and ready to help. That's what's important. Levi places down the budget report, picks up another folder from the side and hands it to Petra. I'm reforming the team. These are the new members of our squad. Petra briefly read through the profiles of each squad mate. Lot of young members, Captain, noticing their ages. Fresh out of the cadet corps, but they've all got combat experience and most were among the top 10 of their class, said Levi. Petra closed the folder and looked upon it with a glum expression on her face. I'm sure Gunter and Eld would have tried to joke around and make them feel as welcome as possible, and Oluo would have tried to show off his kill count to them whenever he could. She smiled slightly, thinking about her former comrades. Levi looked off to the side, though he didn't show it. He felt the same way, yeah. He then turned to Petra. That reminds me, I'm gonna need a new second in command to help manage these unruly brats. Erwin's not here, but I'm sure he'll agree. I'm promoting you to the rank of lieutenant, and from here on out you're my second in command. Petra looked at Levi, overwhelmed by a feeling of shock and pride at the news. She wanted to cry and go on an entire spiel about how much of an honor it is to be assigned as his 2IC. Instead, she decided to stand tall and place her clenched fist onto her heart. I won't let you down, she declared with a voice filled with resolve. You never have, replied Levi. Your first task is to make sure our new squad members get to the former scout castle, seeing as it's turned into our base of operations. Make sure they help tidy up the place. Everyone got a first-hand reminder, said Pixis to Erwin, who was still lying down on his bed with a pillow, forcing his head up to face the people in the room. If Walrose really did fall, they would have at least a week of peace before mankind turned on itself. Erwin turned from Pixis and to his right side. Beside him were a few mechanical contraptions, a metal tray with surgical tools and a small table right next to his bed where his new metal arm lay. Sorry if you feel uncomfortable, Erwin, said Levi. Hang said they had to keep you like that while they continue to work on attaching that prototype. That's perfectly fine, replied Erwin. In fact, I see it as a great privilege to be the first person to benefit from this. We can only hope it gets mass-produced and soon, added Pixis. Hang also mentioned that the rehabilitation is gonna be a shitty process. said Levi. Erwin glanced at his new arm and smiled slightly before turning back to Levi. It's quite all right, he replied. The pain I'll experience won't be enough to make up for the hundreds of men and women I've sent out to die. Consider it a small token for my sins until I can pay back the rest in full when I finally end up in hell. Sounds good, laughed Pixis. Mind if I come with you? What's wrong, old man? Asked Levi, throwing in the towel. Already? Maybe you need another drink. Believe me, I would, said Pixis, slightly annoyed, turning to Anka, who was standing off to the side, but this one won't let me, treats me like a baby without any of the care. Erwin laughed lightly. You have an dutiful advisor, he commented. There was a knock on the door. That must be Hang, said Levi. Come in. Hang entered the room along with Connie and Armin. Good to see you're awake, Commander. The three of them lined up before the bed and saluted Erwin. Good to see you here, Commander Pixis. Allow me to introduce you to Armin Arlert and Dash. Connie Springer, 104th Scout Regiment, sir, said Connie. These two came with me to the Ragako. It's Connie's hometown. Connie witnessed the incident and Armin came up with the theory about the Titans. Good job, you two, complimented Levi. Thank you, Captain, replied Connie and Armin. We're here to report about the incident, said Hang. Under a clear blue sky, Armin surveyed the small village around him. The village of Ragako was in complete ruins, with entire houses either demolished or with gaping holes in them. There were chunks of bricks, planks of wood and broken roof tiles scattered across the ground. The stone paths were cracked by the footsteps of the Titans who came here, and entire trees were uprooted from the dirt. The sound of muffled chatter among the scouts and the loud bangs of a hammer hitting metal filled his ears as Armin knelt down examining the large hole inside the house. He looked down to see a large footprint, possibly from a 7 or 8 meter Titan, facing away from the house. Looks as if the Titan was inside the house and then walked out, thought Armin. Had someone been in that house during the Titan attack, then it's highly unlikely they'd get out, and yet there's not a drop of blood anywhere. Found any bodies yet? Asked one of the scouts. Nothing so far, Armin replied. Armin got up from the ground and headed towards the sound of the hammer hitting metal. A group of scouts hammered stakes into the ground with long strains of rope holding the skinny Titan to the ground. Armin observed the Titan lying on the rubble of Connie's house. Its head was almost the size of its body and its arms and legs were too skinny to support its body. Squad leader Hang, called out Connie, holding a picture frame in his hands. This is a drawing of my parents. They noticed Armin walking towards them. Armin, come take a look at this, said Hang, waving him towards them. The three huddled together and compared the face of Connie's mother and the Titan lying on top of his house. A chill ran down their spines as their eyes shifted from the picture to the Titan. This is incredible, remarked Hang. Looks like your theory was right, Armin. Armin didn't thank her. Instead he looked towards Connie, who was still staring at his mother. Armin placed his hand on Connie's shoulder. I'm so sorry, Connie. Why are you sorry, Armin? Replied Connie, still staring blankly at his now titanized mother. You're not the one who transformed my family into Titans. You just tried to tell me the truth. He looked down onto the ground, his face darkening as he turned from the sunlight. Reiner. Amir, they were trying to convince me it was crazy. They knew about it all. He gritted his teeth together as his anger began to consume him in that moment. They tricked us. They tried to play us for fools. Both Armin and Hang looked at Connie, concerned for him. Remove the nails, ordered Hang to the scouts. Are you sure, squad leader? Asked the scout. I'm sure, that Titan's not going anywhere, just tie it down instead, replied Hang. Thank you, Connie, you can have this back, she said, handing the picture frame back to Connie. Thank you, squad leader, said Connie as he stared wide-eyed at his parents' picture. All I have left of my family is this picture, and my mother. Connie turned to look at his mother once more. He felt tears welling up in his eyes and running down his cheeks. Who did this? Why? If I find out who did this, I won't let them get away with this. So it's confirmed then, said Levi. The Titans that attacked us were from Ragako. Having seen the evidence and adding to that the theory on the Titans' weak spot and why, it's all fairly conclusive, replied Hang. Of course there's still some unanswered questions such as how they became Titans. Perhaps there's a reason behind why Eren and the other shifters can transform from their Titans while every other Titan can't, added Pixis. That reminds me, The reports from Aaron and Alphonse, said Levi. During their captivity, Alphonse questioned Reiner and Berthold on their supposed hometown. He believes that their hesitation towards his question could either mean two things: A. There's a civilization beyond the walls which has it in for us, or B. Humanity might not be far gone as we believed. The room quickly fell silent after the last statement. Some looked at Levi in disbelief. Pixis kept a plain expression, yet, nonetheless, he too was shocked. And Erwin. Why is the commander? Thought Armin, staring at Erwin. Hey Erwin — Levi stopped, catching the expression on Erwin's face. He was smiling to himself. Hey, what the hell are you smiling for? Questioned Levi. Erwin didn't respond as first. Instead he looked at Levi for a second, staring at his disgusted expression, and turned away. Oh, it's nothing. That look on your face makes me want to vomit, said Levi, somewhat disturbed that Erwin could be smiling after these revelations. I've been told that numerous times, replied Erwin. Is this why you joined the scout regiment? Questioned Levi. Huh, said Hang. Does the commander have ulterior motives for leading the scouts? Thought Armin. Knock it off, Levi, said Erwin, slightly irritated. The right side of my body hurts and I'm physically and emotionally exhausted. Where's your pity? Well, you are pitiful, Levi jabbed. Your automail, which reminds me, said Hang. She turned to Armin and Connie. You two are dismissed. Both Armin and Connie saluted the officers before leaving the room. Oh, you two, said Levi, catching their attention. Hang around Trost for a bit, then head to base. Leave only when absolutely sure you aren't being followed. Petra will give you new orders from there. The company that originally helped my team to design the prototypes has suddenly just stopped and destroyed the other designs. Luckily I kept some in my research lab back at the former HQ, one of which you're currently using. Sorry for using you as a test subject. That's perfectly fine, Erwin replied, but it is odd that they'd drop the research. That merchant wanted their company to be the sole producer of it. I suspect there must be foul play involved, remarked Pixis. That's not all. I had a look over our budget report and found that our funding has decreased from the central government, and a few letters from our allies in the Merchant Association withdrawing their support. Added Levi. Looks like someone's trying to pull us back to square one. No doubt they'll be after the powers granted to me by Darius next, said Erwin. There's a powerful organization out there that doesn't want us to find out the truth, and after capturing the female Titan it looks like they're now hoping to hinder us, and by the looks of it, it appears they have control over the central government. We should act quickly if we are to maintain what semblance of power we have within the walls. Where's the Elrics currently? Asked Erwin. They're still inside Trost. They're staying in the barracks for now, replied Hang. They promised to help run you through some general info on automail maintenance. Good, send them here as soon as possible, ordered Erwin. Also, where are Aaron Yeager and Historia Rice? Has she uncovered her secret yet? Not yet, she's still tight-lipped about it, but she'll talk eventually, said Levi. We've got them in a guarded location along with Annie Leonhardt, added Hang. We're keeping quiet until things settle down. It's better we keep everything discussed here to ourselves, advised Pixis. Best not to kick the hornet's nest. Indeed, we can't afford to lose Historia's secret, and whatever intel Annie Leonhardt has may offer us insight to the organization which is trying to undermine us, as well as information on the Titans. Also, we'll need the Elrics and Aaron for our mission to recapture Wall Maria, declared Erwin. It's vital that our assets are in a secure location and are well guarded. Don't worry about it, said Levi. While you were physically and emotionally exhausted, I took the liberty of taking some decisions, namely my squad who will be guarding our assets' asses. If we're to help Aaron reach his full potential and get Leonhardt to surrender whatever intel she has, then we'll need to push them into total desperation. Come in, said Levi as he closed the curtains in Erwin's room, blocking out the night sky and any prying eyes. Both Edward and Alphonse entered into the room. They lined up along the bed and saluted the commander. At ease. Please take a seat, said Erwin. The two moved over to the side and sat down on the sofa to his left. Levi, can you help move my arm onto the bed? As Erwin began to sit up, Levi grabbed his automail right arm and gently placed it on his lap. Thank you, Levi. How's the new arm? Asked Edward. I'm still getting used to it. It's rather heavy and will need continuous work, replied Erwin. Elrics, I have a few questions that I'd like you to answer. Of course, Commander, replied Alphonse, politely. Alphonse, I read your report and I must ask, was there anything else you could add? Anything conclusive at all? Asked Erwin. It was small at first, but the curiosity and excitement in his voice wasn't hard to pick up on. When I questioned them they seemed shocked, replied Alphonse. Both of them refused to answer my question and insisted that I'd find out anyway about their hometown. So some shocked faces. Anything else? Asked Levi. No, that's all I have, Captain. Sorry, apologized. So it's all circumstantial then, no hard proof or confession? Stated Levi. From the look on Erwin's face it wasn't hard for anyone in the room to tell that Erwin was visibly upset. Erwin's face quickly formed to a more blank face expression as he looked up to face them. That's fine. Anyway, there was another thing I'd like to ask of you too. A while back you mentioned that there was a significant change in leadership back in your world. Care to elaborate? There was a coup in our country's leadership. We were run by a military dictatorship which was controlled by the homunculi, a group with its own insidious agenda. Our own head of state at the time was one of them. Said Ed. With the help of various groups, military officers, and soldiers and our dad, we were able to beat them during a time known as the Promised Day. Erwin listened intently to Ed. It almost went wrong, but everyone was able to pull together and carry out their part. We managed to beat them, added Alphonse. The country is still mainly controlled by the military, however the person currently in charge, Furher Grumman, is a good man and helped in overthrowing the past government, and it's possible that a man called Colonel Roy Mustang, who Ed was a subordinate of, could assume power afterwards and shift the country towards a democracy. Not bad. Remarked Levi, noticing the parallels between the events of their world and Edward and Alphonse's. Erwin had noticed it too. Thank you, Elrix, he said, with a sly smile on his face. Now if you don't mind, I'd like you to run me through the events of the Promised Day. More importantly, what was the first step towards that change? Chapter 32, Moving Forward. They're back, said the scout as she peered through her telescope at three individuals, wearing hooded cloaks over their ordinary clothing, riding up to the castle on their horses. Lower the bridge. The three stopped before the entrance as a wooden platform blocking the archway into the castle lowered before them. The platform landed with a soft thud as it hit the ground. The three rode their horses over the bridge, crossing the dried-up moat under them. Two scouts armed with muskets greeted them on the other side of the archway. Captain Levi, said one of the guards. Amidst the low rumbling of the platform being raised, Levi lowered the hood from his head. Both Edward and Alphonse lowered theirs as they led their horses to the nearby stables. Squad leader Hang Zoe and Lieutenant Petra Ral are waiting for you in the mess hall along with her team leaders and the rest of your squad. Thank you, soldier, replied Levi. Any sign of suspicious activity around the castle? None so far, sir, replied the scout. Neither the lookouts or patrols have spotted anything out of the ordinary. Good, replied Levi. Continue to keep an eye out, and if anyone sees anything that is even the least bit weird, then don't hesitate to call it in. Of course, sir, replied Scout, saluting Levi. You're being very careful, Captain, remarked Edward as the three made their way to the mess hall, walking down the long staircase, their footsteps echoing within the long hallway. It pays not to be careless on certain things, replied Levi, like watching your back in case someone wants to put a knife through it. Couldn't agree more, responded Ed as he and Alphonse thought back to the times they were suddenly ambushed on their world. Levi pushed open the door to the hall. At the sight of him his squad stood up from their seats and saluted him, along with the team leaders from Hang's squad, while Hang continued to sit down on the chair with her legs crossed and her arms folded. The large hall was dimly lit with only a few lanterns centered at the tables with people near them, pushing the surrounding darkness of the room to the sides. At ease, sit down, said Levi as he grabbed a chair and placed it at the end of the table while Ed took a seat next to Connie and Alphonse next to Armin at the other end of the table. Levi rubbed his left hand across the table surface, no sign of dust or dirt as he rubbed his fingers together. He then swept his right hand underneath the table and still found nothing, and finally he examined the floor and found not a single track of dirt or any marks on the stone flooring. Not bad, he remarked. Good job, Petra. Thank you, sir, she replied with a small, yet proud, smile on her face while the rest of the squad looked down at the table, a look of exhaustion of theirs. She ran us ragged cleaning this place, thought Jean. All right, so now that we're all here, said Levi, let's quickly go over the past 2 weeks. The female Titan was captured, the colossal and armored Titans have now been exposed and are now somewhere in Wall Maria, Titans have appeared in Walrose and are almost certainly the citizens of Ragako village, and the walls themselves are made of thousands of colossal titans and their hardened skins, and last, but probably not least, someone got it in for the scout regiment and has been trying to take a sledgehammer to our knees. Everyone watched Levi uneasily as he listed off the series of events that occurred so recently. Of course, not everything has gone to hell. Erwin's got something planned to counter the organization who's trying to get us. In the dead of night, inside Erwin's room, Edward and Alphonse continued to talk about the promised day, from the different roles everyone had in the coup and what they knew about the homunculi and their relationship to the military and government with both Erwin and Levi. So the head of state of your nation was nothing more than a puppet for a creature known as the Father? Asked Erwin, and there were those within your military's elite who were actively supporting them in their mission. That's right, said Edward as he thought back to that day, his fist striking through the would-be god's frail body. The military officers involved were arrested and put on trial. The homunculus who was your head of state, this Bradley fellow, was he popular among the people? Asked Erwin. He thought back to the King Fritz and the royal family. Yes, replied Alphonse, he had support among the people and the rank and file of the army. So how'd you get public support on your side then? Asked Levi. A team of people had to seize control of the radio station and broadcast our own version of events, said Alphonse. Both Levi and Erwin looked at Alphonse puzzled. It suddenly hit Al that neither of them had nor knew what a radio was. Oh right, a radio is basically a machine that allows you to spread information over large distances, so like messages, news, music. He said, trying to example it in the simplest of terms. So using this form of mass media, the side you were working with had spread their own message. Clarified Erwin. How ingenious. It should be said that the message sent was framed in a way that portrayed our side as the ones protecting the head of state, using his popularity to our advantage. Added Alphonse. A very underhanded tactic. Commented Levi. I can respect that. Commander, why are you asking us about this? Edward questioned. What are you planning? Erwin was silent for a few seconds, looking down at his hands. If you two must know, I believe the situation we face now is not so dissimilar to the one you had experienced, said Erwin. It's been made evidently clear to us that an organization with far-reaching influence and possible roots in the central government is trying to undermine the progress we've made. They've already halted any further research of the automail prototypes and cut our funding to weaken us. So you want our advice on how to throw a coup then, stated Edward, narrowing his eyes at Erwin. Hopefully it will never come to that. Erwin replied, I would like to find out why and hopefully be able to come to an understanding with this organization and the central government which would allow us to put all our focus towards the reclamation of Wal Maria. But the scout regiment cannot achieve that task so long as someone wants to plunge a knife into our backs. We understand, Commander, said Alphonse as Ed sighed to himself, disappointed that they'd now have diverted their attention from their main goal. First thing we should discuss is gaining public support, said Levi. We don't have these radios and don't think even Erwin's not slick enough to convince the people we're working on behalf of the king if we plan on storming the central government, so how'd we get the people on side? The info about the female Titan hasn't been made public, has it? Asked Edward. No, it's classified, only those in the central government, clergy, military, some nobles and rich merchants investors know of it. Replied Erwin, a sly smile formed on his face, but I see where you're going with this. We leak the results of the 57th Recon mission and the identity of the female Titan, said Ed. That's not all. The battle at Stohess, if you could frame it in a way which portrayed it as a fight to repel an attack on the city rather than an ambush gone wrong, then you might get praise for it. It would also be better if you got the credit for it, Commander. Added Alphonse, seeing as you are the regiment's public face. Of course, we still need to find people who are willing to spread the info, said Ed. If what you're saying about this group controlling the government, then it's gonna be difficult to hijack the newspapers. Don't worry about that, said Levi. I know a few people in the underground who'd love to stick it to the central government. They'd get the message out. You'll also need allies, said Alphonse. Commander Pixis is on our side, informed Erwin. That's good and all, but we should be making alliances with other high-ranking people in the garrison too, advised Edward. We could probably get Captains Ian and Hans on our side. Why those two specifically? Asked Levi. Captain Dietrich is a lot like you, Commander, strong-willed and was willing to do anything for humanity, said Alphonse. I'm sure it won't be too hard to explain the situation to him and convince him to join us. And Captain Hans seems to care greatly for Aaron, Mikasa, and Armin, added Edward. He'll probably do anything to protect them, and at least this way we aren't totally relying on Commander Pixis. On the money side of things, we could. Ed paused for a second as he recalled the rules of a state alchemist. Why do I care? I'm not a state alchemist anymore. We could transmute gold from coal, enough to offset the losses. That could work, said Erwin, though we shouldn't sell large amounts of it. Only enough to supplement our current funding for now, at least until we can change our situation for the better. Wouldn't want to raise suspicions. Or possibly destroy the economy. Added Alphonse. Alchemists in Ames Tries weren't allowed to make gold. But you aren't in Ames Tries, stated Levi. Their rules don't apply, and what we're doing isn't going to make the central government happy anyways, though that being said we still need to find buyers. I believe Gelger may know some people, said Erwin. I'll arrange it with him in due time. Was that all, Commander? Asked Alphonse. For the time being, replied Erwin with a small smile on his face. Thank you, Elrix, I'll be sure to heed your advice. Of course, our primary goal is still the recovery of Wall Maria and sealing that hole in Shiganshina, Levi continued. So long as we can achieve that, then everything else might as well be trivial, from people suddenly transforming into titans, some titan with a hairy ass flinging rocks at us to titan popping up inside Walrose. So going forward, everyone needs to be clear what their roles will be, so any suggestions? Armin raised his hand. Yes, Armin? Asked Levi. In terms of our roles during the recovery of Wall Maria, I think that the job of sealing the hole in Shiganshina should go to Edward and Alphonse, suggested Armin. The way they could seal the hole is through filling the gap with the earth and, seeing as the walls are made of hardened titan skin, they could then overlay the sides by covering the wall over it. Both Ed and Al listened to Armin's idea. It was a solid suggestion and it wouldn't take them that long to accomplish it. Aaron sat waiting for what his friend had planned for him. Of course Aaron shouldn't just hang back and do nothing. His role should be instead to act as our counter against Reiner or the Beast Titan when we face them in combat, and should, for whatever reason, Ed and Al not succeed on their end, then it's possible his own hardening abilities could seal up the hole instead. Armin paused momentarily, allowing his idea to linger in everyone's mind. Adding to that, the recovery route gives us a clear path towards Wall Maria and provides us with an already existing supply chain, should we need it, which means we won't have to bring any wagons with us. We would hopefully reach Shiganshina in possibly one night, meaning that the operation to recapture Wall Maria would take less than a day to accomplish. Everyone listened. Most were astonished at the claim Armin was making, that an operation which was 4 years in the making could be done in less than 24 hours. It sounds like a good suggestion, commented Petra. At least this way we're not putting all our eggs into one basket. Though are you three up to it? Levi asked. Yes, sir, replied Aaron and Alphonse. No need to ask, consider that hole in the wall gone, said Ed. Good, now on to the experiments. Hang, Armin, from what I've heard you two want the Elrics to teach you some of their alchemy, yes? Yes, sir, replied Armin. Yes, said Hang, somewhat reservedly. And which one of you is going to teach them? Asked Levi, looking at Ed and El. I can do that, Captain, replied Alphonse. However, said Hang, catching their attention, while I know that the situation we're in is perilous, currently the garrison are now spread thin patrolling the walls after the recent incident inside Walrose, leaving cities unable to maintain order within the cities. I want things to improve rapidly. I want to test out Aaron's Titan powers and not just his hardening abilities, and I want to learn more about alchemy, not for our benefit but because it will be key to ushering in a new era of progress. I don't want to waste any time. I want to get started as soon as possible, but until we can enact Erwin's plans to cover us, it's best we just lay low for the time being. The members of Levi's squad, Edward and Alphonse, both looked at Hang, both dismayed and astonished. Look, it won't be a long wait, said Hang, trying to reassure them, at least until Abel can give the intel to the underground journalists. They turned their heads looking towards the team leader wearing the goggles. That could take days, argued Armin. Hang, is there something you'd like to tell us? Asked Levi. From the moment I saw you it looked like something was bothering you, like you were holding in a shit. Why don't you relieve yourself and tell us? Minister Nick is dead. She said remorsefully. He was found inside the Trost barracks this morning. Both Ed's and Alphonse's stomach dropped at the news. Moblet and I only got to look at him for a few seconds, but it looked as though he was beaten and his fingernails were pulled clean off. He was tortured and then killed. This morning, said Alphonse, his voice shaking slightly, but we were there not that long ago, we should have heard something. They must have done it when the barracks were clear, said Hang, likely just when you two left to meet with Irwin at night. Ed lowered his head into his hands, squeezing his temples. Son of a bitch. He muttered, frustrated that something like that could happen right under their noses. The MPs investigating the scene, they were from the Interior First Squad, one of them had done it, his hands were stripped of skin, he's the likely culprit. Said Hang, as she looked at the ground. I thought the church would come after him, that's why I hid him in the barracks, but I never expected they'd use soldiers. I was foolish, Nick's death is on me. They must have tortured him to find out how much he'd told us. Said Armin. Likely checking if their little secret about the Rice family and the church got out and where the four of you are hiding. He said, looking at Aaron and Historia and then to Edward and Alphonse. We've informed both Commanders Irwin and Pixis, our other allies in the garrison and the entire scout regiment about this, said Moblet, so for the time being it's us who are watching them, though that's not to say that would hold them off. It's entirely possible that they'll just change tactics and, considering the location, it wouldn't be too hard for them to find us. I'm assuming the reason why you want to hold off on the experiments for now and wait for the leaks is to force the Interior MPs into a corner, said Levi. That's right, Hang replied. Once the information is out and the public are, hopefully, planted with the idea of a conspiracy in their minds, then neither the 1st Interior Squad nor the central government would act against us without risking a backlash, and if they do, all we'd need to do is announce their attack and confirm the public's worst fears, that those in power do not wish to see humanity progress. But don't we risk creating a split between people if we do this? Asked Jean. If they decide to make a counterclaim, then it will be our word against theirs. We're forcing people to pick sides. I understand, Jean, replied Hang, sympathetic to his concern, but this organization we face may already have drawn a line in the dirt dividing the military. We're already at a crisis point. I don't think us adding a bit more is what sends humanity over the edge. Added Armin. So what would you have us do until then, Hang? Questioned Levi. Sit around drinking tea all day. Referring back to Hang's decision on lying low until they could leak the information to the public. I'm with the captain on this, Hang, said Ed. I don't know about you guys, but I get antsy when I'm just doing nothing. Well, if you need something to do, then I would recommend knitting. Replied Hang with a hint of sarcasm. Just for now, please. Hang, do you truly believe that the people who have it in for us are going to stay in the corner once we put them there? Levi questioned. They have connections to the church, the central government, the Interior MPs, and have probably got the kind of resources to plug up Wall Maria and then build another wall for shits and giggles. Every day we spend doing nothing is a day they've spent sharpening their knives and looking for an opening into our backs. It wouldn't take a genius to realize this fortified castle is where we're holding our greatest assets, and once they've come up with their bullshit excuse, they'll be the ones to turn the tables and corner us like rats. Hang sighed, then looked to the ground once more. You're usually more clear-eyed, but the guilt of Nick's death is making you fearful. How many of his fingernails were pulled off? Asked Levi. Huh? Said Hang, a bit confused by the morbid question. I only saw him for a moment, but it looked as though all of them were taken off. I see. If someone was going to give up their secret, then they'd have done it after the first one. If not, then it wouldn't have mattered how many they'd taken off. Said Levi. That preacher may have been an idiot, but it appeared he really had conviction in his beliefs. Levi then turned towards Historia in front of him. So Historia, seeing as how Nick sacrificed himself to protect us, are you still gonna keep quiet about that secret? He asked. It was clear he was trying to guilt-trip her. Historia looked down onto the table and away from everyone's gazes. She held her hands together and then let out a deep sigh. Remember, you also made a deal with Irwin. Levi reminded her. Minister Nick told me that the Rice family, we're the true royal bloodline. A few hours had passed since the large group meeting with Hang's squad about the future and the revelation of Historia's heritage. But there were still meetings to attend, this time between new members of Levi's squad, specifically the 104th, and their captain. Here, said Levi as he lowered a piece of paper onto the table in front of them, visitation lists, I'm allowing you all you see Annie Leonhardt and get the chance to speak to her, he announced. To their shock and confusion, if you can I'd like you to try get her to talk, see if we can't get any important information from her, if not then hang and I will resort back to our previous methods. He said, adding emphasis on the last two words. Levi looked around the table trying to gauge their reactions. His eyes quickly caught on to a certain new member, their head lowered slightly and their eyes on the table. It was almost as if they were trying to hide their disapproval of Annie's torture and their despair for her predicament. Gotcha, he thought, so Aaron, Mikasa, Sasha, and Connie you four opted out, are you sure that's what you want? Yes, Captain the Four said. For Mikasa there was nothing she could really say to Annie, she was just glad that the person who helped destroy her home and tried to kidnap the only family she had left was rotting underground. A part of Aaron wanted to confront Annie again and demand that she tell him why she'd help push humanity to the edge, why'd she, Berthold and Reiner betray them, why'd she help destroy his home and kill his mother. But he knew Annie wouldn't budge and he had said all that he needed to say towards the main culprit of his mother's death. As for Connie and Sasha, Berthold cries and pleading told them what they needed to know and they couldn't come face to face with Annie again, at least not now, they wanted some time to recover. Alright then, the list goes as follow, Armin Arlert, Jean Kirstein, and then Mina Carolina. Hope you don't mind that I promoted Petra to the rank of lieutenant, said Levi, staring at the outside with his arm resting on the windowsill. The warm orange rays of the morning sunlight flooded the room. Levi wanted to run Erwin through his and Hank's plan before he would soon leave for the castle with Edward and Alphonse. Not at all, replied Erwin, still lying in bed as he looked through the profiles. She's a skilled soldier and this should be a good opportunity for her to gain leadership experience. Perhaps one day she'll make an excellent squad leader. He then looked upwards towards Levi. So these are the new replacements for your squad? Asked Erwin as he looked over the new additions to the Special Operations Squad. All of them were from the 104th Scout Regiment. They all have combat experience and a few Titan kills under their belt, said Levi. While I do understand why you've added most of these new additions, seeing as the majority of them are among the top 10 of their class and Alert has proven himself a valued strategist, I wonder why you chose to include her, Mina Carolina. Said Erwin, as he read her profile, 3 kills, 2 solos and 1 assist, and her grades in the Cadet Corps shows constant improvement. She a promising soldier but not what I'd expect for our most elite squad. You're right, said Levi. He then looked back to Erwin, but I didn't pick her because she's another Mikasa Ackerman. It's part of our strategy to get Leonhardt to talk and the best way to do that is through, whom I was told is, the person closest to her. Levi left the window and then walked up towards wall, turning around to face Erwin with his back leaning against the wall. What I intend to do is force Leonhardt to see her crimes then offer her an out. It's quite the gamble you're taking, commented Erwin. Gambling is all we've ever done. Levi replied. Knock, knock, said Levi as he tapped the top of Annie's head with his knuckles, waking Annie from her slumber. She looked upwards towards Levi and glared at him. If looks could kill then Levi would have dead 10 times over. You look like you want to kill me, Levi remarked as he took a few steps back and looked down on her. Don't worry, I'm Will, thought Annie, here to torture me again. Annie spat, I'm not telling you anything, shrimp. Levi watched her almost disinterested in what she had to say. We ousted your comrades, Reiner and Berthold, said Levi in very calm manner. Annie felt the pit of her stomach drop as a feeling of dread crept up on her. They tried to capture Aaron and Alphonse and make a break for Shiganshina, at least I'm assuming that's where they'd go, until we caught them and left them empty-handed. Levi observed her reaction. I even stabbed that very tall brat in the back. He'll stay away if he knew what was good for him. You bastard, growled Annie, letting the mask of her callous nature slip a little. Levi took notice. Last time I saw them those two, they were getting munched on by Titans, said Levi, swarmed. I doubt they even made it. Levi lied. He knew that Emir had gone to save them. Even if they managed to miraculously survive we could always get Aaron to send another horde their way again. That's right. Aaron's the coordinate, thought Annie, but how did he manage to? Levi then grabbed her hair and pulled it forward. He knelt down and looked her in the eyes. How does it feel? He asked, to know that you're stuck here, that your comrades aren't going to save you and even if they were would likely end up where you are. Bullshit, said Annie, angrily. Two times I could have killed Berthold but didn't get to. First time I wanted to savor the moment when I plunged my blade into his heart and ended up waiting too long, and the second time I was in a hurry and missed. But trust me when I say this. I don't intend to miss a third time, threatened Levi, his voice still strangely calm. And Reiner? Turns out Edward and Alphonse can break his armor, and once that's was gone he's just another Titan Aaron can pummel into the dirt, or we can cut out from the nape. The feeling of dread that was creeping up on her had now completely taken over as Levi revealed Reiner and Berthold's defeat. Am I going to be stuck here? The terrible thought passed through Annie's mind. You haven't won yet and you're not going to, she responded, and why should I believe anything you say? With his free hand Levi reached into his pocket and took out what looked to be a smooth cream-colored rock. You know what this is? He asked. Nonchalantly, a piece of the armored Titan's plating that got shattered into pieces. They're not coming to save you because there is no scenario where they could possibly succeed. Levi let go of her hair. Annie's head slumped down as she faced the cold stone ground. Annie shut her eyes tightly, trying to hold back her tears and not show vulnerability to her captor. No. I can't be stuck here, she thought. I promised him, Dad. Do you understand? Asked Levi. No one's coming to save you. Levi turned away. He left the cell and returned to the floor above, leaving Annie alone in the darkness with her father's words echoing in her head. I don't care if you make the entire world your enemy. The door to the basement opened once more and the sound of footsteps on the wooden stairs echoing across the hallway and cells caught her attention. She looked upwards to see Armin opening the door to her cell. Hey, Annie, said Armin. His voice was soft, yet it wasn't hard to pick up on the sadness. Armin, she replied. Annie sighed. I'm guessing you knew the whole time. Armin nodded. I didn't throw you off, did I? She asked. Armin shook his head, confirming her statement. Annie, when you asked me whether I had the guts to die, you were trying to dissuade Connie and I from joining, and you even tried to convince Mina to join the garrison, said Armin. You didn't want us to join the scouts because you didn't want to be put in a position where you'd have to kill us. You didn't kill me during the expedition. Annie didn't respond to Armin, yet her silence told Armin what he needed to know. You really did care about us, huh? Armin, she said, did you think I was a good person? I never liked that phrase. Armin replied as his eyes wandered towards the side. That's just what someone calls a person when they act in a way which benefits them. It's impossible for someone to act in ways which benefit everyone, and no matter what you do you'll always be a bad person to someone else. Armin's eyes turned back to Annie. He lowered his head, the long fringes of his blonde hair covering his eyes. But I guess with that being said, you helped destroy my home, inadvertently forced my grandfather to his death, and you seem determined to push humanity off the edge, and all for your own reasons. To me, you are a bad person. After that, Armin left Annie. Once more she was left alone with only her father's words to comfort her. Even if every other creature alive comes to hate you. Hey! Came a voice in front of her, followed by the sound of someone slamming their fist onto one of the iron bars. Annie looked up to see Jean, the metal bars of her cell separating the two. The look on his face said it all. He was furious. Armin told me, he told all of us, you had Marco's gear during the inspection, you took it from him. What the hell happened in Trost that day? What exactly were you thinking when left him to die? His voice shaking as he finished his question. Annie? Please stop. Even now she could hear Marco's cries. Why? 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 He cried. I didn't want to do it. Annie replied in a usual reserved tone, trying to hold the grief at bay. I had to. Had to? Questioned Jean. What do you mean? He found out about Reiner and Berthold. He overheard them talking. Annie confessed. When I got there Reiner had him pinned down. They were in on it too then, said Jean. The look on his face expressed anger, yet his voice sounded sad. We didn't want to do it, she confessed, her voice shaking slightly. We cared about Marco too. Bullshit! Yelled Jean, unleashing all the anger that had built up after he found out. Don't you dare say you cared about him when you three were the ones who killed him. He took a few steps back from the bars, his back hitting the wall as he slid down onto the floor in a sitting position. Marco, all he ever did was think about other people. He was our friend, he was my friend. Jean didn't notice it, but he began to weep over the memory of Marco. We had to burn his body because of you three. I'm sorry, Annie replied as she softly cried, teardrops hitting the cold stone floor. unable to hold back the feeling of despair and guilt over Marco's death that she kept bottled. "Sorry?" Jean asked as he tried to wipe away the tears. Neither of you three get to be sorry, not after what you've done." Jean picked himself off the ground, still wiping away at the tears and snot running down his face. He didn't care if in that moment he looked like a fool. He wanted Marco back. Jean slowly climbed the stairs and shut the door to the castle's underground, once again leaving Annie alone with her thoughts, the words of her father and her guilt. "We'll always be on your side." Annie, once more, heard the sound of her cell door opening. She looked upwards to see the face of her next visitor, the next person to pass judgment on her. "Mina," she whispered softly, her friend of 3 years, the one who stuck with her during the training corps and always had nothing but a smile with bright eyes for her and kind words. This time she said nothing, she couldn't even look at her. Annie wondered what she was going to say to her. Was she going to tell her how betrayed she felt? Was she going to remind Annie of everything she's done, or was she going to outright condemn her? Annie looked away from her just as Mina opened her eyes to look at her. "Are you here to yell at me? Going to ask me why I did it?" Annie once more felt tears welling in her eyes. "Going to tell me that you hate me, that I'm a monster who's responsible for so many people being killed, because I know that and I don't need someone telling me this dash." Mina quickly fell to her knees, wrapped her arms around Annie and hugged her tightly. "I could never hate you," Mina replied as she cried her own tears onto Annie's shoulder. "You're my best friend, I love you, Annie." Annie didn't know what to say. Instead she simply rested her head on Mina's shoulder and buried her face into her neck as Mina continued to embrace her. "No matter what, Annie, I'll help you," Mina promised. "I'll always be by your side." Under the small yellow flame of candlelight, Alphonse sat at the table near the entrance to the dungeon as he waited for Mina to open the door. He thought back to the moment before she left and the guilt he was still feeling since their conversation. "I'm sorry I kept it from you," he said. "If you're angry at me then I understand." "I'm not angry at you, I know why you couldn't tell me," Mina reassured him. She stared anxiously at the wooden door, trying to build up her courage. She turned her head to face Alphonse. "Al, could you wait of me here, when I get back?" He looked over to the side, a small pile of notes about the basics of alchemy next to him for Armin and Hang to read before their first lesson, along with some examples of different alchemists from Alex Louis Armstrong to Roy Mustang. The door to the underground creaked open and Mina slowly walked out. They both looked at each other for a second. Mina rubbed at her now puffy red eyes. Alphonse got up from his seat, walked over to her and gently hugged her. "Thanks for waiting," said Mina. "Are you okay?" asked Alphonse. "Yeah, I'm fine," she replied. She moved back slightly, her arms were now loosely at Al's sides, and tilted her head up slightly to face Alphonse again. The two stared at each other for a few seconds. She slowly moved her head towards his. "Hey Al!" yelled Ed, from the far side of the hall, catching their attention. "I need to talk with you for a moment." Mina lay in her bed, inside the large room she shared with Mikasa and Sasha. The faded yellow rays of the setting sun passed through the window covering her. It had only been a couple minutes since her meeting with Annie and her almost moment with Alphonse. She went over the moment again in her head. Should I have done that? She thought, would he have? "Hey," called a voice from the door. She moved upwards to see Captain Levi by the door, looking at her with his usual apathetic look. She quickly got off her bed and saluted him, the two looking eye level at each other. "Connie's done with his shift. Put on your coat. He's hand you the rifle at the main entrance." "Yes, Captain," replied Mina. Levi then walked away from the door and down the dimly lit hallway. Mina took out a folded grey coat from the chest next to her bed and put it on. She walked down the hallway, past the other rooms. She then noticed the sound of low and muffled talking behind one of the door. She instantly remembered whose room it was. Curious, she slowly walked towards the door and pressed her ear onto it, the voices inside becoming slightly clearer, enough to make out people inside. The voices were from Edward and Alphonse. Despite their attempt to keep their conversation private under a low whisper, it was clear that emotions were running high. "You know I'm right," was what Mina could make out from Ed, a slight growl in his voice. "It's not like that," said Alphonse. "She's my friend. We're friends with a lot of people here, but nothing like you and her," Ed accused. "I'm not an idiot, Al." Mina could make out what sounded to be a sigh from Alphonse. "You know we have to head back home, sooner rather than later." "Back to Ames tries," Ed's voice now sounded a lot softer. "Back to Winry, Grandma, and Teacher, and my. Mina's instantly felt a slight pang of guilt hearing that name again, and everyone else, along with all the people we're gonna bring back too. It gonna hurt when we'll have to say goodbye to everyone here. I just don't want it to hurt even more for you if you were to get into something like that. Mina sighed gently through her nose whilst staring at the ground as she thought over what Ed had said. He's right, she thought. I guess you're right, brother. Alphonse conceded. Mina lifted her head from the door and quietly walked down the hallway, a feeling of disappointment and sadness hanging over her. All right, now try it, said Alphonse as he handed them a mug, filled less than halfway, and of what looked to be a smoking hot brown-colored liquid. A small group consisting of the new recruits of Levi's squad and the Elrics all huddled together in the castle's kitchen as they prepared their dinner. What is it? Asks Armin as he stared at his hazel-colored reflection. Smells burnt, said Sasha as she raised the mug to her nose. It's coffee, Alphonse replied with a smile. I transmuted some beans we had to make it, though it might not be perfect. I'm a little rusty when it comes to bioalchemy and we didn't have any sugar around, he said, rubbing the back of his head. I'm sure you did great, Al, Ed reassured him. Haven't had coffee in a while, he said, raising the mug to his lips. The rest followed Ed's example as they experienced the hot beverage for the first time. Aaron, make sure you blow on it before drinking, said Mikasa. You don't want to burn your tongue. Yes, Mikasa, replied Aaron, in a very calm manner. Tastes kind of bitter, commented Connie, swirling the remaining contents around in the mug. It's actually pretty nice, said Armin. More please, asked Sasha, holding the mug out to Alphonse. You shouldn't drink too much, Alphonse advised, you'll end up having trouble sleeping. This was really only meant to be a small taster. Sasha pulled the mug back, a disappointed expression on her face. Hey, where's Mina? He asked. She's still on guard duty, said Jean, as he took another swing from his mug. Sasha was supposed to go up but Mina insisted on doing her shift. I guess she just wants to be alone for a while, added Sasha. I just hope she's okay. Alphonse looked over to the side. A single untouched mug sat on the counter. I'll go check on her, he said as he took hold of the handle. You guys carry on cooking. Alphonse walked over to the door, leaving the group to their task. Ed watched as the door closed in front of him. He let out a soft sigh. I hope you know what you're doing, Al, he thought as he placed the mug down. He turned his head towards the kitchen counter and caught Sasha refilling her mug. The two stared at each other briefly as Sasha tried to think of an excuse. Ed smiled at her softly. Go on then, I won't tell, he said, just don't drink too much. He knelt down onto the ground and opened up one of the cabinets, taking out a small brown package. Oh guys, he said, getting their attention, I thought you'd all like this. He unwrapped the packaging to reveal a chunk of salted meat. Meat! Exclaimed Sasha, also choking on her large gulp of coffee. Meat, haven't had that in a while, smiled Armin. Where'd you get that? Asked Jean. A woman from Trost gave it to me as a thank you for repairing her house, Ed replied. She said she found it a wooden chest near her house. Aaron, Connie, and Sasha both gasped. Wait, what? Yelled Sasha, to Ed's confusion. Holy shit, it's the meat you stole from Officer's pantry, Sasha! Yelled Connie as a huge grin quickly formed on his face. With an almost Levi-like speed, Sasha placed her mug down on the counter and took hold of the chunk of meat. We should cook this, said Connie, celebrate becoming a part of Levi's squad. Ed admired the smile on Connie's face for a second. He felt concerned about him. Losing his family and home as well as the betrayal of his closest friends must have taken a heavy toll on him. And, of course, there was that rushing revelation that from Edward and Alphonse not so long ago. Knock yourself out, Ed laughed. Both Connie and Sasha cheered as they took to preparing it. Ed then felt gently bump into him. He turned his head to see Aaron standing next to him. How's Connie been? He asked, whispering to Aaron. Before you and Al got here, he was talking about killing the Beast Titan, said Aaron, solemnly, the look on his face, it was almost like, me. There was a few seconds of silence between them. After the meeting, Connie asked Al and I if we could add his family and village to the list of people to bring back. Said Edward, we had to tell him we couldn't, that the demand would only work in one world and couldn't be split. The truth is always in the details. Ed thought as he looked back on the day they agreed to the job and the truth then spelling out further details. You never make this easy, do you? Inside one of the towers of the castle, Mina sat upon windowsill staring at a cloudless night sky littered with bright white stars. The inside of the tower was mostly dark, save for a few lit candles resting on the table where the rifle lay. Suddenly a knock on the door. Mina slid off the windowsill and opened the door. On the other side stood Alphonse, holding a mug in one hand and a lantern in the other. The light from the lantern bathed Alphonse in a warm orange glow to match his even warmer smile. "Hey, Al," smiled Mina as she let Alphonse through. He placed the lantern down onto the table and handed her the mug. "Thank you," said Mina as she looking into the mug's contents. It was hot and smelled as if it had been roasted. "What is it?" "It's coffee," Alphonse replied, "a drink I had back in my home. I made some and gave it the others to try, since you guys never had it before." Mina took a sip from the mug. A look of discomfort contorted her face slightly as the hot beverage hit her tongue. "Don't like it?" he asked. Mina nodded her head. She handed Alphonse the mug back. "Sorry," she said with a guilty look on her face. "Tastes bitter." "Don't worry," said Alphonse, smiling. "I always preferred tea." The two then sat down on the windowsill, looking out into the surrounding area. "Hey, Alphonse," said Mina, "thanks for saving back then, in Troston at the castle." "I should be the one thanking you," giggled Alphonse. "That makes it 2 times you came to my rescue. I guess that makes us even." The two laughed softly. "Is this how it's going to be?" she thought, "constantly risking our lives for each other?" "I'm glad I met you," said Alphonse. "You're an amazing person and a good friend." Friend, the word lingering in her mind. "Thank you, Al," she said, smiling at him. "You too." Chapter 33, Day and Night. "Disgusting," remarked Abel as he stepped into a murky puddle of water. He lifted his boot from the dirty puddle and shook his foot a few times before continuing on his way. As he walked along the large path, he carefully observed his surroundings and the people, with right hand resting on his hand cannon while pulling up the hood of his cloak before then resting his hand onto the small bag at his side. The underground was a dark place, both figuratively and literally. Only the bottom of this colossal-sized cavern was illuminated with any proper light, while the very top was barely visible from the darkness. The houses were all clustered together, with shanty houses wedged in between small alleyways, and along the large path he was walking there must have been tens of people either sitting or lying in the muck-covered ground, all of whom looked half dead, like they had given up on life and were now just waiting to die. Abel pulled out a piece of paper from his side. Its contents contained the address of a group of journalists who could spread the classified information. He passed under a dark narrow tunnel. The smell of urine was thick in the air and the path was overflowing with sewage. "Now I know why Captain Levi is a clean freak," he thought to himself. He arrived at the address. It was a small house built on top another house with a set of stairs leading to the door. Abel walked up to the door. "When you knock, repeat this pattern," he recalled Levi telling him. Abel knocked on the door. The door opened slightly to reveal a bald, scruffy-looking man with a large build standing on the other side, carrying a large butcher's cleaver. "What do you want?" the man asked with a gruff voice. "When they open the door, tell them I sent you and that I'd like them to help us throw some shit at the royal government," Levi told him. "I know these guys from a while back, did business with them from time to time." "Captain Levi sent me," replied Abel, his right hand still holding onto the hand cannon by his side. "He said you could help us throw some shit at the royal government." "Levi, huh?" the guy replied. He then gently pulled the door open, allowing Abel walked inside. In the main room were a few more people, 2 women, and another man, all of whom looked more well-kept than the large guy at the door. All of them looked tense at first, but then they quickly took their seats and began shuffling some papers. The place was cramped with stacks of paper piled around the walls and tables, not to mention the air inside was stuffy, more so than in the underground. "Yeah, that sounds like Levi all right," commented one of the women among them who were currently sorting through what looked to be a small stack of sketches. She was about average height, dark hair, and brown eyes on a round face, as eloquent as ever. "I thought he'd have kicked the bucket after deciding to stay in the Scouts," said the guy next to her. He was tall, though not as tall as the guy at the door, medium build and greenish eyes and strawberry blonde hair on a broad face. "Where are your manners?" said the other women standing over them. She was short, about Nifa's height, slender build, light brown hair with white patches and hazel eyes on a long face, and, while the rest seemed to be in their mid-30s, she looked to be in her 50s. "Our artist's name is Agatha, the pretty guy is Isaac, our editor," the large man at the door is Lewis. She held out her hand towards Abel, and finally, my name's Oda, I run the place. Abel shook her hand and introduced himself. Abel, I'm a team leader in 4th Squad and a subordinate of squad leader Hang Zoe. Nice to meet you, Abel, Oda replied. Please, take a seat. The two sat on opposite ends of a table. So why does the scout regiment need our help? She asked. We need you to leak some information to the public, Abel stated. What kind of information? Asked Oda, curiously. Some of it is the classified kind, Abel replied, catching her interest. He then handed her one of the folders from his bag. Oda opened the folder and quickly read its contents, results of the 57th expedition and the identity of a captured enemy shifter, which only those at the top know about, and a report from the Battle of Stohes showing that the scout regiment managed to counter an enemy attack on the district. The report about the Battle of Stohes was, of course, a fabrication, but failed ambush didn't paint them in a good light. And the rest? She asked, her eyes looking towards him. Evidence that after our recent successes, the royal government is trying to undermine the scout regiment. He said, also the sudden end of any further development on automail, a new type of tech which could replace lost limbs. He handed her another folder from his bag. She flicked through its contents and almost immediately her eyes fell upon a rough copy of the blueprints for an automail arm. Interesting, Oda whispered to herself. She placed the folder down onto the table and looked up to Abel. It doesn't take a genius to realize what you guys are trying to do, get the masses on your side so that the royal government thinks twice before they even breath in your direction, yes. Something like that. Abel replied. You know, this could end badly. She warned, not everyone's going to buy into your story. You might just end up pitting people against each other, and with the situation as it is, adding more wood to this burning building we call home could be what finally tips it over to the point of no return. And if we do nothing? Questioned Abel. If we don't reclaim Wall Maria, if we don't defeat the Titans before they decide to break the walls down again, and if mankind is denied the tools of its progress, then how long will it all last? Oda sat silently listening to Abel. We're all fully aware of the possible consequences of what we're doing, but sitting back and doing nothing won't help humanity. A sly smile formed on Oda's lips. That's what I like to hear, she replied. I'll see it that this information to the people in the other districts. So Abel, let's throw some shit at the royal government. On the surface, miles away from the capital, the sun had yet to rise from the horizon. The sound of birds chirping and the rustling of trees filled an almost silent landscape. Levi stood by an open window watching the trees swaying in the morning breeze. Captain, came a voice from his side. He gently turned his head to see Petra. She was dressed in plain clothing and stood saluting him. Rest of the squad is up and in the mess hall, sir. Thank you, Petra, replied Levi. He walked past her and towards the mess hall, the sound of his footsteps. He walked down the staircase and came up to the door, and as he was about to push the door open, the sound of laughter and talking stopped him. He stood there for a moment and listened to them. How can you not like milk? Asked Sasha as she poured some from the large metal canteen into her wooden cup. Ed watched, trying not to gag, as she took absurdly large gulps from her cup. I just don't, Ed replied, looking away. He had a sickly feeling overcoming him. Never liked the stuff. You'd used to throw a fit whenever people made you drink it. Alphonse mentioned, smiling at him. Ed glared at him in return. Well, I love the stuff, declared Sasha as she placed her cup down. I'm pretty sure you love just about anything that's edible, commented Jean as he tore off a loaf of bread. Humph, was all Sasha had replied to Jean's comment as she lifted up the metal canteen once more. Sasha, how many cups have you had already? Asked Armin. Less than 5. She replied, after some hesitation, with an uneasy smile on her face. What the hell, Sasha? Yelled Jean. Sasha, you shouldn't drink that much, said Mikasa. Don't you know how much milk costs? Questioned Aaron. Soon enough the conversation turned into bickering. Levi sighed softly to himself as he pushed the door open. Hey, he said, raising his voice slightly. They all turned to see him standing at the entrance to the kitchen, and immediately they all saluted him. Don't you know how early it is? The night patrol is still sleeping. Where's your consideration for your comrades? Sir. They responded. He observed them and looked upon the tense looks on their faces. Well, almost all of them. Ed and Mikasa still had a relaxed expression on their faces, and Mina, She wasn't in the room. "Where's Mina?" he asked. "Mina's in the basement," replied Jean. "She's gone to give Annie some food, sir." A few seconds of silence passed. "Once you're done, collect your gear and start cleaning it. Most of you will be training with Petra later," Levi told them. "Edward, some our engineers want to see you, and Alphonse, you're teaching Hang and Armin. Are we all clear?" "Yes, sir," they replied. Levi shut the door and walked away from his squad. He once again traversed the large castle until he came up to Hang's study. On the other side of the door the sound of pen frantically writing on paper could be heard. He knocked on the door. "Come in," said Hang, her voice slightly muffled. Levi opened the door. He saw Hang sitting down at her desk, copying off notes from a few sheets of paper and a mug of something that smelled burnt. "Good morning, Levi," she said, a large smile on her face. "It's pretty early in the morning to be this chipper," he said, as he entered the room and closed the door behind him. "Well, this coffee sure does wonders," she said, lifting the mug before taking a sip from it. "Want some?" she asked as she raised the mug towards him. "It'll be a cold day in hell before I drink anything that might contain your spit," Levi replied. "Suit yourself," she replied as she placed the mug down. "By the way, we got a message from Erwin," she said, handing him a small folded-up note. Levi took the message from her. He pulled up a chair near the desk and began reading its contents. "Looks like he got our message about the Rice family being royal blood," said Levi. "He also needs us to tie up some loose ends, specifically making sure the lie about Stohess doesn't get out." "So, any idea on how we're going to do this?" asked Hang. "I'll think of something," Levi replied as he folded the small note and placed it back on her desk. "You just focus on the experiments. That's basically how electricity works," Ed said as he finished off his explanation to the engineers. A black chalkboard was littered with scribbles and writings. "It's used to power almost everything on my world, light sources, factories, houses, and a whole range of different tech, etc." The group of scout engineers, who were seated through his lecture, began scribbling their own notes. "If you guys are planning on making more new tech in the future, then you should get to work on this." "How do we make it?" asked one of the scouts. "Electricity, that is." "You're gonna need a generator to do that," Ed replied. "It turns kinetic energy into electrical energy. Back in Ames tries there were a bunch of different ways to do it, from burning coal, natural gas, water, and wind. I guess that's where you guys come in. After all, I'm an alchemist. The ice burst stones, the gas that's used for ODM gear, we could use that," suggested one of the engineers. "And the rivers that flow into the districts," suggested another. "We could put turbines on the walls," exclaimed a third. Quickly the room descended into a loud chatter of different ideas. Ed smirked to himself as he listened to the group excitedly discuss the possibilities. Suddenly there was a knock on the open door, getting everyone's attention. It was Captain Levi. "Captain Levi, sir!" exclaimed one of the scouts as they all shot up from the seats. "At ease, sorry to do this, but you're gonna have to cut this thing short," he said. He turned his attention towards Ed. "Edward, come with me, I need to see you in my office." "Sir," was all the group replied. Ed remained silent as he walked towards Levi. The two began to walk along the castle long hallways. "Captain Levi, what's this all about?" Ed asked, his eyes looking down slightly at Levi who was walking beside him. "I'll explain when we get to my office," Levi replied. The two arrived at his office door. Levi turned the knob and pushed it open. Inside sat Mikasa, who turned her head to face them, on the other side of Levi's desk in an empty chair next to her. "Take a seat, Edward." He sat down next to Mikasa as Levi sat opposed to them. "We got orders from Erwin and he needs us to make sure our little lie about the Battle of Stohess doesn't come out." He handed them the note from Erwin. They both took turns reading the message. "I'm going to break into the government building in Stohess and you two are going to help me." Both Ed and Mikasa looked at Levi with shock. "What exactly are we going to do?" asked Mikasa. Levi opened the drawer and took out a map of Stohess district. "The only person who knows about the plan to ambush Reiner and Berthold is the mayor, and, on top of that, there are some planning records that need to be destroyed." "And what do you need us for?" asked Ed. "Obviously we're not going through the front entrance," said Levi, his finger tapping on the location in the map. "Ed, I need you to make a door for us in this alleyway, Find where they keep their records and burn them all. Ed was about to protest when Levi quickly shushed him and looked toward Mikasa. Mikasa, I need you to create a distraction to lure the garrison and MPs away. How you'll this is by setting off a bomb near the area. Levi placed his finger onto a warehouse nearby. It'll be empty so there's little chance of any civilian casualties, and once that's done make sure our entrance doesn't get discovered. If we do get discovered then head back to the horses and wait for me. Are we all clear? Yes, sir, Mikasa replied. Mikasa, you've only recently recovered from your injuries after the recovery expedition. If you want to withdraw from this mission then I'll understand. I'm perfectly fine, sir, Mikasa assured. Isn't this a bit extreme? Ed questioned, destroying all that information and work. That's just wrong. Why can't I just go find the records itself? For two reasons, one being that it'll take too damn long to find them, and two, it wouldn't take a genius to ask why only those records got stolen and then connect the dots back to the scouts. Frustration began to build up inside Ed as he thought of a way to argue against it. I know that what we're doing isn't good, but it's necessary if we're to get the upper hand against people in control. Ed sighed, accepting Levi's judgment. Captain, what will you be doing? Asked Mikasa. I'll be having a few words with the mayor, Levi said, even though his voice never changed. His answer left them with a slight uneasy feeling. Edward, you know that hair thing you did back when you and Mikasa were trying to leave? Gonna need you to do the same for us. 30 minutes had passed since the meeting. Inside the armory, Ed and Levi sat across from each other, a small table with a large bowl of brown dye and a small mirror in between them. You sure I can wash this shit off later? Asked Levi, somewhat hesitant to dip his hair into the bowl, his eyes shifting from Ed's now black hair to the brown dye. Yeah, I'm sure, replied Edward. Now put your head into the bowl. Levi lowered his head into the large bowl and felt the watery brown liquid bathe the front of his hair and forehead. Ed smirked to himself as he heard Levi wince slightly. He placed his hands together and dipped one hand into the bowl while placing the other onto Levi's head. The brown dye quickly traveled up Levi's hair and turned his jet black hair into a chestnut brown. Levi lifted his head upwards and grabbed the mirror to examine his hair. I also made these boots for you, said Ed as he pulled out a pair of black boots from behind him while Levi slicked his hair back with his fingers. They'll add about 3 inches to your height. Figured it'll help disguise you. Ed handed the boots to Levi, who placed them on. They both stood up from his chair to compare their heights. Not bad, Levi commented as the two were almost at eye level with each other. Levi was now standing at about Sasha's height. Come on, get your gear on and let's head out. Mikasa waiting for us by the stable. The two quickly strapped on their ODM gear and headed to the castle stable. Make sure to take hand cannon with you in a acoustic round and give one to Mikasa. If we're in trouble then we'll signal each other. Once there they found Mikasa. Her hair was dyed in a dark auburn color and tied back into a small bun, with Hang and Petra. Whoa Levi, did you suddenly grow taller or did you shrink, Ed? Teased Hang. Ed felt his eye twitch. I didn't shrink, he said through a forced smile as he tried to keep his anger at bay. Levi's just wearing boots that make him taller. Looks like you might have struck a nerve, Hang, Levi commented. He then turned his attention to his second in command, Petra. You're in charge of the Special Operations Squad until I come back. Understood, Captain, Petra replied. Lower the gate, Levi ordered as the three climbed up onto their horses. The low rumble of the chains and the muffled thud of the wooden platform landing onto the ground disturbed a peaceful quiet. All right, move out. Ed whipped the reins of his horse, sending it galloping forward alongside Levi and Mikasa. Within Hang's study, Alphonse sat across both Hang and Armin with a large table holding a wide variety of different materials and objects and a stack of paper containing various transmutation circles. Before I can teach you the basics of alchemy, you have to know crucial thing, which is this: all is one and one is all. You are one and the universe is all. Everything is connected together, said Alphonse. So like the food chain? Asked Hang. Not just that, Alphonse replied. All things are connected, caught in this great flow that binds even the smallest ant to this massive universe, but yet it still forms a part of the all. All is one and one is all, Armin repeated, quickly catching on. We are all in one. Yes, Alphonse replied. He then pulled a piece of paper with a transmutation circle drawn on it. As you'll know from the notes, this circle is for transmuting the earth. He took a small tub of dirt and poured it out onto the transmutation circle. If you want to create something, then something of equal value must be lost. I can only create with what I have, nothing more. This is the law of equivalent exchange. He placed his hands on the circle and suddenly the lines of the circle were lit in a bright blue glow as small sparks appeared around the small pile of dirt. Both Hang and Armin were quietly and diligently observed the demonstration before them. In the past they, like everyone else, had been in awe at demonstrations of alchemy, but now they watched with analytical eyes, wanting to learn how to perform their own demonstrations. The small pile of dirt then transformed into a small rock as the blue light faded and the sparks disappeared. Alphonse moved his hands away, finished with his demonstration. Also, trying to bypass the law of equivalent exchange will result in what's called a rebound. The alchemic flow of things will be thrown out of balance and will try to stabilize itself, and it could end really badly, said Alphonse, putting it as mildly as possible. He laid out a piece of paper in front of them and poured out more dirt. You guys try. Both Hang and Armin placed their hands on their transmutation circle, visualize the atomic structure of the material. There was a familiar bright blue light and sparks of lightning as the dirt formed into small rock. Wow, we actually did it! Yelled Hang as she grabbed Armin and shook him excitedly. Squad leader Hang, please stop shaking me! Armin exclaimed while Alphonse giggled at the two. Alright, let's try some other stuff, suggested Alphonse. For the past hour Armin and Hang went through the various materials and elements before them and transformed them into different shapes and objects, all under the guidance of Alphonse, who was quickly offering them advice and answering any questions they had. He was surprised at how quickly they were learning and catching the hang of performing basic alchemy. Maybe we could move towards more advanced alchemy in the near future, Alphonse thought. Alphonse, have there ever been a case where someone was able to work around the laws of mass conversion? Asked Armin. No, I don't recall a case like that, Alphonse replied. He then sighed. I would like to find a way to push the boundaries and form new rules. My brother and I wanted to establish a whole new principle of giving more than we take. He explained. Of course we have to prove it can be done first. Going against the flow, huh? Said Hang. It's been my belief that humanity advances by searching for possibilities that aren't bound by rules and laws, Alphonse replied. I agree, said Armin. If humanity is to survive, then we must be able to abandon what holds us back. Preach, yelled Hang in agreement. Alphonse giggled at Hang's enthusiastic support. Okay, is there anything specific you guys want to work on? Asked Alphonse. I like what we're doing now, Hang replied. All right, said Alphonse. He turned his head towards Armin. What about you, Armin? Armin looked to be in deep thought, as if he was evaluating his options. Flame alchemy, Armin stated, much to Alphonse's shock. I'd like to learn how to perform the same kind of alchemy as that alchemist Roy Mustang. Armin. 100 different things to say ran wild in Alphonse's head. I can't teach you that, it's not a form of alchemy I know much about. But you know the basic principles, Armin replied. You told me back when I asked you to teach me, we could work up from there. With your guidance and knowledge we could do it. Alphonse looked at Armin with an almost scared expression on his face. It probably won't be easy, but it's worth trying. Armin, why do you want to learn that kind of alchemy? Asked Hang. Her tone was more serious, a sharp contrast from her tone only moments ago. Armin was quiet for a second. Back when we were trying to rescue you and Eren, I had to drag Jean away while trying to escape from a Titan. If it weren't for Connie and Sasha, then we would have been killed, and had Eren not used his power to command the Titans, then we'd have all been killed. Both Alphonse and Hang sat silently as they listened to him. Looking back, there were so many instances where something like that could have been vital, repelling the Titan attack on the right wing, and during our ambush, the fight with Annie, the battle at the castle against the Beast Titan, the charge towards Reiner. Luck has always been a factor in our victories, and more often than not you, Ed and Eren have become a deciding factor in our battles, which puts you at risk. With flame alchemy we could tip future battles in our favor and put less pressure on you three. For the good of humanity, we should try. Armin finished. Alphonse looked down onto the table, a feeling of anxiety and dread creeping over him as he thought about what Armin said. It would be extremely dangerous. He warned, if anything goes wrong, then it could leave you badly injured or even killed. I'm willing to take that risk, Armin replied after some hesitation. The loud creak of the cell door opening caught Annie's attention and she looked upwards to see the face of the one person who hadn't yet condemned her. "Hey Annie," said Mina with a sad smile on her face. In her hands was a small wooden tray with what looked to be a loaf of bread, a cup of water and a bowl of soup. Mina gently placed the tray down in front of her and tore off a chunk of bread. "Can't eat with your arms chained to the wall," she said as she raised the chunk of bread to Annie's mouth. Annie bit down on the loaf of bread while Mina got the cup of water on the tray. "Let's wait for the soup to cool down," she said as she gently placed the rim of the cup to Annie's lips. "Why?" thought Annie. "Mina," Annie said as Mina placed the cup down. Why don't you hate me?" she asked. Everyone in this castle either hated or feared her. She was the enemy and a threat to humanity. The looks and comments from the guards and her former comrades had told us as much. But yet, this person still had a smile for her. "Mina looked to the floor for a few seconds when we found out you were the female titan. I was heartbroken," she said. I wanted to hate you, I felt so betrayed, but I couldn't. It might be naive or stupid, but I still see that person who kept to herself but liked spending time with people, the person who had always had a grumpy face yet the sweetest smile, the person who always tried to act like she didn't care yet was so passionate about her fighting technique from her dad. That person is my best friend." "Thank you," was all Annie could say, unable to express the feeling of sadness and love she had for Mina as her friend. She smiled softly at her. Mina wrapped her arms around Annie and hugged her tightly. "Your father will always be on your side." "I want to go home," said Annie. "I want to see my dad." "I wish I could do that for you, but I can't," replied Mina. I feel so uncomfortable," said Annie, the chains holding her arms rattling. "I hate it here. I might be able to convince the officers to improve your conditions, maybe make your chains longer so that you could move a bit," Mina suggested, pulling away from her. "But the only way I could convince them is if I can show them you're cooperating with us." "They want information from me," said Annie. She sighed. All throughout her continued captivity she's denied the scout any information and had endured torture at the hands of Levi to keep them in the dark. Because Annie believes she could escape someday. And she still believed. She looked off to the side and towards her arm. Weeks of being tightly chained to the spot had caused her to waste away, and no doubt her lack of practicing her fighting technique was making her rusty. If she was to survive, then she would have to comply, but if was to not be ousted as a traitor to her motherland in future. "Almost everyone in the walls belongs to a certain race of people," said Annie after some silence between the two. "They have the ability to turn into titans and are susceptible to the commands of the coordinate Aaron's titan." In the courtyard of the castle, the Special Operations Squad had concluded their training and were now waiting for Hank's experiments with Aaron later on in the day. Petra, Connie, and Jean all watched as Sasha began demonstrating her skills with a bow, while Alphonse and Mina sat back on wooden crates under the shade of nearby tower, talking and watching Sasha from afar. "What kind of friends did you have back home?" asked Mina as she sat listening to Alphonse talk about his life back in Ames Tries. "We made a lot of friends on our journeys," said Alphonse. "This one guy called Ling would constantly eat and hassle us for food." "Sounds a lot like Sasha," giggled Mina. "He kind of does," laughed Alphonse. "What did he look like?" she asked. "Surprisingly, he was pretty lean and tall." "Alphonse. We met him back in a place called Rush Valley, where they make auto mail like the one Ed has. He was on a mission to find a way to become immortal." "Immortal?" exclaimed Mina. "Crazy, right? It was for a race to become emperor of his country between him and his 42 siblings. 43 kids, that's insane. And he was a prince." Mina replied, completely dumbfounded. "Okay, you got to explain that." "Basically his dad was the emperor of the country of Seeing and the head of 50 clans that make up the country," Alphonse explained. "Each clan chief would marry their daughter to the emperor in the hope that their grandchild would become emperor. When the emperor was sick, he tasked his children with finding immortality, and whoever was successful would become emperor." "So who won?" asked Mina. "Ling," Alphonse replied. "He's currently the emperor now, and last I heard he was doing well. He vowed to protect each of the clans in Seeing." "That's nice," Mina replied, smiling. "Did you ever meet any of his siblings?" "Yeah, she's another friend we made during our journeys," Alphonse replied. "She's a master in alchemy and could throw knives with pinpoint accuracy. She taught me about alchemy during her time in Ames tries, and she had a pet panda too. The last time I saw her was with her brother before they left, which was about 2 years ago. What was her name? Asked Mina. Mei Chang. Alphonse. Answered. Oh. Alphonse Elric. Both Alphonse and Mina looked off to the side. Walking towards them were 2 scouts carrying double-barrel shotguns. Both Alphonse and Mina saluted them. We are to escort you to Leon Hart's cell. The scout turned to Mina. Squad leader Hang Zoe approved your request. I'll see you soon, said Alphonse. Yeah, Mina replied as she watched the 3 of them walk off back towards the castle. She turned her gaze towards the others still chatting away and watching Sasha's archery. You're an amazing shot, Sasha, complimented Petra as Sasha's arrow hit the center. Thank you, Lieutenant Petra. Sasha replied. Please, just Petra when we're off duty. Petra said with a soft smile on her face, or at least when the captain is not around. How did you get 58 kills? Asked Jean. That number seems almost impossible, added Connie. It's all about teamwork. Petra replied, only about 10 of them are solo kills and the rest were assist. If we can trust each other completely to have our backs, then I'm sure we can do it. As soon as those words left her mouth, the memory of her squad mates dying quickly flashed through her mind. Her expression turned slightly somber at the thought of them. Petra, are you all right? Asked Connie, the 3 noticing her slight change in mood. Petra quickly perked up. Oh, it's nothing, she replied. Like I said, just have faith in your comrades. The 3 of them smiled at her and nodded their heads in agreement. Sasha turned back towards the archery target. She placed an arrow back into the string, pulled back the bow and released an arrow shot which struck dead center. Nice shot, cheered Connie. Way to go, Petra added. Hey, let me try, asked Jean. Sasha handed Jean the bow and sat next to Connie. Jean placed an arrow onto the string, pulled back and released the arrow. Unluckily for him, the arrow didn't hit the center but instead struck the wall behind it, both Sasha and Connie starting giggling. Shut it, you two, Jean yelled, fuming over his missed shot and their teasing. These guys are going to be depending on me, Petra thought as she watched them mess about. I can't let it happen again. I'll do whatever it takes to keep them safe. Hey guys, came a voice from the side. They all turned to see Mina walking towards them, still doing archery. Yeah, wanna try? Asked Sasha as Jean offered her the bow. Do you have anything else? Mina asked. We have some arrowheads if you want to trying throwing them, Connie offered. Might not work out too well though. Mina picked up the arrowhead and, with her fingers, starting playing with it for a second. She then aimed her hand towards the target and threw the arrowhead. The sharp projectile struck the target but bounced off and landed onto the floor. Can't be helped, she muttered as she looked at the target with an apathetic yet almost sad expression on her face. What can't be helped? Asked Petra. Oh, it's nothing important, Lieutenant Petra. Mina replied with a slight smile. She turned towards Jean. I'll try with the bow this time. Under the cover of an ever-darkening sky, Levi and Ed waited in the alleyway near the Stohes government building for the first part of their covert operation. The streets were quiet with only a few people wandering around and the odd patrol from the garrison. Luckily no one had gone into the alley and discovered them. Ed glanced over to Levi, who was leaning up against a wall. Ed gripped the handles of his ODM gear tightly. He was ready to move at a moment's notice. Suddenly the sound of a loud explosion, accompanied by a slight rumble of the ground, shook them into action. Give it a second, said Levi, stopping Ed as he aimed the handle upwards. Let the guards go check it out first. The sound of yelling and boots stomping mixed into the roars of the blazing fire nearby. All right, let's go. The 2 of them fired their cables upwards. They were now more than 20 meters off the ground. This should be the 3rd floor. Ed clapped his hands and placed them onto the wall, transmitting a row of open window for Levi to enter. Levi looked back at Ed somewhat confused. It's less suspicious that way, Ed said. A single window would be too obvious. Fair point, Levi replied. 2nd floor is just 5 meters below. Remember, burn the archive and leave nothing behind. Make sure you start a small fire. It gives me some time with the mayor before I have to leave and everyone else in the building some time to escape, Levi instructed, before he climbed through. Ed lowered himself down, the metal wires zipping as he made his descent. He placed his handles back into his straps pockets and transmuted a row of windows for him to enter through. Hope Mikasa doing fine on her part, he thought as he climbed through the open window. Within the alleyway of two houses, Mikasa hid and watched as groups of MPs and garrison soldiers rushed towards the large blazing fire nearby. Even from here she could feel the heat of the flames as the soldiers rushed to pour water onto the enormous inferno. "Flames spreading over here," yelled an MP. "Don't get too close," warned another. Was this an attack? One questioned. "By who?" responded the other. She turned away from the scene before her and began to make her way towards the government building, towards the alleyway where she'd join back up with Edward and Levi. She peered round the corner towards the alleyway, checking to see if anyone was there, and saw nobody. She ran towards the middle and looked up to see a row of windows. "Looks like they're already doing their part," Mikasa thought. "Just got to wait for." "Hey," said a voice from the other end of the alleyway. She turned her head to see a tall, skinny-looking, old man wearing a long black coat and black bowler hat. He walked towards Mikasa, allowing her to see his thin beard and long and rough-looking hair. "What are you doing here?" he asked as his eyes quickly caught sight of her ODM gear. "Were you the one that started that fire?" His voice was rough and almost creepy. "I mean, it's obvious you ain't a soldier. Stay back," Mikasa ordered as she took out one of her blades from the scarab. She hoped it would have intimidated the strange man. Instead the old man gave an almost demented smile. "So you were the one that started the fire," he said as he reached into his coat and pulled out a large knife. "Looks like I can't let you escape then." The two stared at each other for a second before the old man lunged towards Mikasa with his knife and Mikasa charging forward with her blade. The old man slashes his knife to the right but Mikasa blocks it with her blade. She throws a hard punch towards him but he moves his head back causing her to miss by an inch. She kicks his ankle causing him to buckle slightly and goes in for another kick but the old man counters with quick punch to the gut. She stumbles back with her hand clutching her stomach. Damn it, she thought. The guy was tougher than he looked and she had hoped to scare him away or knock him out. Instead she was now in a fight for her life. "You're pretty good," the old man said as he got back up to his feet. "You're fast and there's a lot of power in your hits, kind of remind me of a certain midget I used to know." He played around with the large knife in his hand. "I think I'll prolong this fight a little longer before I kill you." Mikasa charged towards him more once and leapt into the air with her arm pulled back and her hand clenched into a fist aiming for his head. The old man blocks the incoming punch and tries to stab Mikasa with his knife but Mikasa quickly leans to the side and avoids the attack. She sweeps under his feet causing him to fall to his knees. She raises blade upwards with the intention of hitting him with the butt of her handle. However the old man quickly counters by slamming the handle of his knife into the right side of her ribs. "Ah!" Mikasa cried out, the attack to her still recovering injuries throwing her off. The old man quickly gets back up and raised the knife over her. This time he intended to finish their fight. Mikasa quickly manages to block the attack and hold him in place. The knife just inches away from her face. She quickly reaches into her pocket and pulls out the hand cannon. She points the gun towards him but the old man grabs her wrist and points the gun slightly off to the side before Mikasa could pull the trigger. A loud bang echoed in the alleyway. "Missed," said the old man in a smug tone. With as much force as she could, Mikasa kicks him in the gut and sends him tumbling back, giving her some distance. Mikasa clutched at her side with her hand while keeping a tight grip on her blade. She watched and waited for her attacker to make his next move. She winced at the sharp pain in her right side. "Okay," he said as he dusted himself off. "This was fun for a while but now this little fight is over." "For you it is," yelled a voice from above. They both looked upwards to see someone descend onto the old man with their leg sticking out to kick him. "Edward," thought Mikasa. The old man quickly turned around and, with almost perfect timing, stabs Ed's leg with the large knife while Ed was still in the air. Ed instantly strikes the old man with his other leg, slamming the sole of his boot into his face. The old man falls onto his back as Ed lands crouching onto the ground. Ed looks down onto the knife plunged into his left leg and pulls it out, tossing it to the side. "Mikasa, you alright?" asked Ed, a look of concern on his face. "Well, aren't you something else?" said the old man, lifting his head up slightly. Ed turned his head towards him once more. Stabbed you in the leg and not a drop of blood on the ground, hell you don't even look hurt. He got up from the ground and glared at Ed. Wonder how fast I can drop you. Bring it, you old bastard. Growled Ed, raising his fists to his face as he prepared himself for a fight. Hey you two! Yelled another person. The three turned to see a group of garrison soldiers armed with muskets. Don't move. Neither Ed nor Mikasa complied. They instead fired their cables onto the top of the building and quickly reeled themselves upwards onto the rooftops, evading the Shtohess garrison. In a small forest, near the walls of Shtohess, Mikasa sat back against a tree while Ed began checking his automail leg. Bastard got through the metal plating but didn't hit any of the wiring. Ed said as he closed up the large slit in his leg. How are you holding up? Ed asked as he placed his boot back on and walked up to her. Not good. Mikasa replied, I think my ribs might be fractured again. Ed sighed, you shouldn't have taken this mission so soon after recovery. He said, we'll get you a medic back at the castle. Suddenly the sound of zipping cables catches their attention. It was Levi arriving at their meeting point. He landed onto the ground to the sound of the soft crunch of his boots landing some twigs and leaves. What happened? Levi asked as he walked up to them. Someone attacked me in the alleyway. Mikasa informed as she stood up. I don't think he was part of the military. He was dressed in civilian clothing and only had a knife on him. Levi looked at Mikasa with a confused expression on his face. How did a civilian give you a hard time? Levi asked. The tone of his voice and expression his face suggested that he was confused at how someone could go toe-to-toe against Mikasa. His eyes widened slightly, as if a terrible thought had occurred to him. What did he look like? He asked, this time with a sense of urgency in his voice. He was tall, old-looking, slim and had a long face with a thin black beard and long hair. Ed described, he wore a long black coat and a bowler hat. He was fast and weirdly strong. Mikasa recalled, but the way he smiled at me, it was as if he was crazy. He was enjoying the idea of fighting and killing us. Levi took a step back. No, it can't be. He muttered. Both Ed and Mikasa watched as Levi looked to be in almost complete disbelief. Captain, what's wrong? Asked Ed. Who was that guy? Mikasa, you fired that gun. Levi asked her. Yes sir, when he got the better of me I tried to use my pistol against him. Mikasa replied, but he managed to counter before I could aim it. Levi had an almost disappointed look on his face, yet he nodded at Mikasa as if to approve of her actions. What did you do, Edward? Levi asked. I wasn't going to kill the guy if that's what you're going to ask. Ed responded, with all due respect, Captain, I have no intention of killing anyone. Levi glared at Ed as if to say he disapproved of Ed's decision. Listen, that guy back there was dangerous. Levi told them, his fist clenched and his eyes falling onto the ground as if he was in deep thought. You should have killed him when you had the chance. Chapter 34, Our Progress. Lower the gate. Yelled the scout as she caught sight of three riders charging straight for the castle. The chains violently rattled as the large wooden platform quickly collapsed onto the ground with a loud thud, just before horses reached it, allowing the three to enter through the gate and come to a complete halt as soon as they passed through. Help her, she's wounded. Yelled Levi at the scouts nearby as he quickly climbed off his horse. He stood back and watched as two soldiers ran up to Mikasa and carefully helped her off her horse. Mikasa continued to clutch at the right side of her body as stifled groans escaped her mouth. Riding on a horse for that long must have done a number on your ribs, said one of the scouts. Get her to a medic, Levi ordered. Of course, Captain. The other replied as the two helped carry her towards the main building. He watched for a few seconds as the three rushed back inside. He turned his head off to the side to see Edward handing the reins of his horse to another scout. He walked towards Ed, catching his attention as Levi approached. Ed looked disheveled, his hair was messy and his eyes were slightly bloodshot, no doubt from spending the whole night on their small operation and the long ride back. How's Mikasa? Ed asked him. Medics will take care of her from here, Levi replied. A few seconds of silence pasted between the two. Edward, about that ambush from that old guy. Is there something you're not telling us, Captain? Edward questioned. You know who that guy was, don't you? Yeah, I did. Levi admitted, which is why I'd have preferred you'd have attacked with the intention to kill the bastard. You could have easily used your blades or your alchemy as well. I'm not killing anyone for you. Edward said in a hushed, yet angered, tone of voice. I'm not asking you to kill for me. Levi retorted, just know that your refusal to do so will come back to bite you in the ass one day or even put your comrades in danger. No offense, Captain, but I don't need you to lecture me on something like this. Ed replied, anger and annoyance radiating from his voice. I've handled people who wanted to kill me in the past, so I know what I'm doing. Ed turned away from Levi and walked off towards the castle himself. Hey, what about this crap on my hair? Levi called out as he watched Ed walk away. Just wash it off. Ed replied as he waved his hand dismissively. Levi turned away from Ed, his eyes looking at the ground as he thought about Edward and Mikasa's encounter with him. Of all the people to run into, why him? Why was he there? Levi thought. Ed awoke from his bed, his nap leaving his slightly groggy. He sat up onto the edge and rubbed his eyes. He then turned his head and looked towards the window. It was late in the afternoon and the sky had already begun to darken. He got off his bed and began rummaging through a chest at the foot of his bed. As he grabbed his towel, he noticed a familiar bulge into the front pocket of his folded brown waistcoat. He opened the pocket and found his State Alchemist pocket watch. He opened the watch and took out the folded photograph of himself, Alphonse and Winry. He smiled softly at the picture and headed towards the bathroom. The room was dimly lit with candles hanging from the walls and row of buckets full of water, resting on a long table, lined up along a wall of mirrors. Ed placed the photograph on the table and cupped some water into his hand to splash it onto his face. He looked at himself in the mirror. His hair was still dyed black and he hadn't changed from the clothes he wore during the night raid. He placed his hands together and dangled his ponytail over the bucket as the black hair dye was drained from his hair. It won't be long now, Ed thought as he watched the dye dripped into the bucket. He looked down at the photograph once more. Soon, we'll be home soon, Winry, we just have to go through this first. He folded the photograph and placed it into his pocket as he left the bathroom. He threw his towel onto his bed and made his way through the castle. Wonder how Alphonse is doing, Ed thought as he walked through the long corridor. He arrived at the castle's library and found Armin and Alphonse looking over a small stack of papers under candlelight. Hey, Ed called out towards them, catching their attention. Hello, Ed, Armin replied. How was your nap? Alphonse asked. Don't exactly feel refreshed, Ed replied as he walked towards them. You guys in the middle of a lesson? He asked. We actually just finished lesson with Hang, Alphonse informed. Armin just wanted to go over a couple things. You're pretty keen, Armin, Ed commented. He looked down at some of the notes on the table, picked one up and began reading. As he read the contents of the note, he began to feel confused, all the components that made up air with a specific focus being on oxygen. He placed the note back down, picked up another and read. This time it was about oxygen manipulation and forming pathways. A creeping sense of uneasy came over him. This is. He placed the sheet of paper down, a bit more frantically, and picked up one with a familiar-looking transmutation circle on it. It was a circle with inverted hexagrams, a small flame at the top and a salamander at the bottom. Alphonse, can I speak with you for a second? Ed asked, yet it sounded more like he was demanding. The two walked out of the library, leaving Armin alone, and into the hallway. It was clear from the look on Ed's face that he was vexed. When you said you'd teach Armin and Hang alchemy, I didn't expect it to be flame alchemy. Just what the hell were you thinking? I didn't want to do it, Armin was the one who insisted on doing it, Alphonse replied. And you couldn't say no? Ed asked. You couldn't have warned him about the risks? You think I didn't try? Alphonse shot back. It was clear from his voice that he was annoyed. He knows it won't be easy and I told him that it could get him killed, yet he still wants to learn it. Not going to be easy is an understatement, Edward commented. Is Hang in on this too? No, she wants to try a bit of everything, Alphonse replied. I run them through a variety of different transmutations and anything specific they want. Flame alchemy is something Armin's learning in both the lessons and his spare time. Armin's going to fail? Ed said. He's only just started learning alchemy. They've actually been fast learners, Alphonse replied. And you think Armin's capable of both learning and helping to make a type of alchemy from scratch? Ed asked. That's something we'll have to find out, said Alphonse. Edward, yelled a voice further down the corridor. Both Edward and Alphonse turned to see a scout waving at them. Captain Levi wants to see you. What is it now? Ed muttered, somewhat annoyed. We'll talk more about this later, he said to Alphonse before walking towards the scout. Alphonse nodded his head and headed back towards the library as Ed left for Levi's office. Ed opened the door to Levi's office. Inside he saw Levi sitting alone on the other side of the desk reading a letter, an empty chair on the opposite side. What is it this time, Captain? Edward asked as he sat down on the empty chair. He sounded exhausted. You've been summoned to the capital, Levi said as he handed Edward the letter. Edward began reading its contents. Some of the bigwigs want to talk to you. Well, not you specifically, they'd talk to either you, Alphonse, or both, but I figured since your brother is busy teaching Hang and Armin, you're free to speak on his behalf as well as yours. A meeting with some members of the Privy Council, Ed thought to himself as he read the letter. Think it might be a trap? Edward questioned. You'll be going into the Chancellery with Erwin. He'll be heading into a different meeting, but I doubt this is an ambush. More likely they'll try to convince you and your brother to join their side. Will they? Ed said as he folded the letter in half. His voice sounded almost amused at the idea. I guess this would be as good a time as ever to get them to explain themselves. If you want to leave it, then that's fine. Honestly, I wouldn't blame you for not wanting to meet those fat pigs in the capital, said Levi. I'll go meet them, Ed replied, throwing the folded letter onto the table. Got a couple things to ask them anyways. Alright then, Nifa will be heading to the capital to relay Historia's secret and the information we got from Annie, so you'll just tag along with her. So when do I leave? Ed asked. You've got about an hour to clean yourself up properly and pack some clothes before she heads off, Levi replied. Ed groaned loudly at the news of his sudden departure. Hey, you're the one who agreed to it. Aaron slowly opened his eyes. His vision was blurred but quickly cleared as he regains consciousness. He lazily lifted his head up slightly from the pillow. Aaron, you're awake, yelled a voice at his side. Aaron slowly turned his head to see Hang and Moblet. Moblet, get some hot water and a towel. Yes, squad leader, Moblet replied as he sprints out of the room. Aaron laid his head back onto the pillow as he quickly slipped back into slumber once more. And get Levi too, was the last thing Aaron heard when he shut his eyes. Hey, said a voice by his side as he felt a hand grab his shoulder and shake him. Wake up, slacker. Aaron opened his eyes once more to see Levi standing over him. Use this, said Levi as he dropped a wet towel onto Aaron's face. The towel was steaming hot, taking Aaron by surprise as he quickly picked up the towel from his face and sat up on his bed. Aaron began rubbing the moist towel on his face, the warm droplets of water running down his face. He looked upwards to find himself in the sleeping quarters of the castle with Hang sitting beside him, Levi sitting at the end of his bed, Historia standing at the end of his bed, and Alphonse standing next to Hang. Good to see you back to your old handsome self again, Hang joked. She was holding a clipboard up towards Aaron. Where's Mikasa? He asked. Aaron was surprised not to see her here to check on him after her mission with Levi and Ed. Mikasa is being checked on by the medical team, Alphonse informed him. Her ribs have been damaged again. What happened? Asked Aaron, concerned over the well-being of one of his closest friends. Someone tried to kill her during the operation, Levi told him. Luckily Ed managed to get the drop on him before the MPs showed up. That's good, I hope she's okay, Aaron commented. How did the experiments go? He asked, looking back to Hang. Was I able to harden my skin? I'm afraid not, Hang replied to Aaron's dismay. Nothing at all? He asked. No, sadly, we examined the skin of your Titan and couldn't find what might have resembled anything similar to either the armored Titan or the female Titan's skin. Hang flicked through the papers on the clipboard. Here's what happened. Alphonse transmuted some 15-meter-tall dummy Titans from the ground for you to destroy. You transformed into your Titan and tried to harden your fists in order to punch them, but to no avail, you were unable to do so. After that we decided to run some intelligence and endurance tests instead. For a couple minutes, Hang went over the results of their tests. telling him about his odd behavior after prolonged periods within his Titan and the limit of his abilities. As Eren listened to her, he felt more and more distraught that he couldn't succeed on his part. So, that means my inability will only make the operation to retake Wall Maria more difficult. Eren said, sounding frustrated. I won't be able to meet Reiner or the Beast Titan on an equal footing if that's the case. Don't beat yourself up, Eren, said Alphonse, speaking up. We can still seal the wall and beat them. We've beaten Reiner and Berthold before and we'll do again, even if we have to face the Beast Titan too. Eren perked up slightly at Alphonse's encouragement. You realize the only reason we almost, keyword, almost, won back at Stohess against Reiner was because we got the drop on him. If either you or Ed try to fly directly at him again, then he'll squish you like an annoying fly. Eren mulled over Levi's retort, thinking back to his fight with Reiner. Had it not been for Ed breaking the armor, then Reiner would have certainly won. Just trying to be helpful, Captain, Alphonse remarked, slightly annoyed. Don't get snarky with me, Alphonse. I get enough of that from your brother. Our situation isn't completely fucked. Honestly, it could be worse, but that doesn't mean we've got an easy ride either. Look, I know I'm being an asshole about this, but someone has to point out and complain about our fuck-ups. Life in these walls is shit. Even the air smells like shit. It's always been that way. I didn't notice it until I stepped outside the walls and breathed the air outside. Life outside is nothing short of a living nightmare, but it's got something the walls don't have: freedom. What Levi's trying to say is all is not lost. We may have not been able to harden your Titan body, but we were able to learn vital information about your Titan, and that's a success. Hang clarified. Also, we were able to uncover some crucial information from Annie Leonhardt. It turns out that humanity within these walls belongs to a race of people capable of transforming into Titans, and your Titan, the coordinate, has the ability to control everyone. Eren's jaw dropped at the revelation from Hang. That pretty much explains why those at the very top want to capture you, Levi added. He then turned his head to Historia, who was standing quietly next to them. Of course, we still have to wonder how this fits in with you and the royal family. But it's safe to say our lives are pretty much tied to you, Eren. In any case, we've managed to learn a lot. Hang declared. We just got to keep moving forward. She turned face Levi. Isn't that right, Levi? Yeah, thanks for the clarification, Levi replied with a hint of sarcasm. Eren glanced at Alphonse, who was watching Levi and Hang converse with each other. He looked down onto his hand and clenched it into a fist. Am I really cut out to be one of humanity's saviors? He asked himself. I'm not like them. I haven't mastered my powers. I'm almost useless. But if I keep learning, then I won't be. He unclenched his fist, opening his hand. Why did I think of my father during the experiments? Did it affect my abilities? He thought back to the last memory of his father, leaving their home in Shiganshina on that fateful day. Father, where are you? Have you already? Suddenly the image of a woman flashed before his eyes, she standing in her room, wearing what looked to be a nightgown and was combing her long black hair. She was a stranger to Eren, yet she looked familiar in a way. Historia? No, it can't be. Am I remembering this? An almost unbearable headache overcame him. He placed his hand onto his head, trying to soothe the pain. I can't. Eren, are you all right? Alphonse asked as he approached Eren. Yeah, I'm fine, Eren replied. Moving forward, we need to uncover more information about the Titans and the royal family, while also organizing ourselves around the information we already have. Hang explained. For now we'll put the hardening test on hold. Hopefully Mina can get some information from Annie regarding the hardening ability, and we'll try to learn more about your Titan's controlling ability. Our next step should be to further investigate those at the top and hopefully learn something about the coordinates' power and the other secrets they've hidden. With both Erwin and Edward in the capital, hopefully they'll be able to learn about the Rice family, the true rulers of humanity, and why they've kept the secrets of the Titans from us, and why royal government seeks to undermine human progress. Ed watched from the horse-drawn carriage as a group of children frantically ran off with a large black bag stolen from what looked to be a wealthy-looking man who swung his cane at them in anger. The capital of the walls, the area was no doubt a home for the important and the wealthy. The buildings were similar to those in districts along Wall Sina, and the streets looked well kept. He sat opposite to Erwin and Nile, who Erwin had asked to escort them to the chancellery, much to Ed's displeasure. A gang of child thieves. The state of the capital is worse than I thought. Irwin commented as he watched the same sight as Ed. It's the same as everywhere, crime's gone up and the crackdown on it have led to overcrowding in prisons. Niall said, adding more insight to the disintegrating state of order in the walls. He turned his head slightly towards Irwin. Why'd you ask me to come with you? Isn't the kid enough company for you? Niall questioned, this whole trip been awkward with him glancing at me like he wants to punch me in the face. He said, turning his attention to Edward. Sorry if I'm not friendly with the guy who tried to argue for me in my brother's execution, said Ed, his voice growling slightly as he recalled the trial that occurred not so long ago. What would you have done in my position? Niall questioned. 3 freaks of nature show up out of nowhere with powers that could wipe out all of humanity. Seeing as the freaks of nature helped save a city, I wouldn't have been an idiot and killed off our greatest advantages. Ed responded. Idiot? Niall questioned. You dare insult a superior officer? Wouldn't be the first time. Ed shot back. That's enough, Ed, Irwin calmly injected, raising his right arm at him. Ed turned away from Niall and looked back to the window. It baffles me how you're still alive, Niall commented as he observed Irwin's metal hand. I guess that new metal arm of yours serves as a reminder that you're just as mortal as the rest of us. I see it as a privilege to be the first to receive an auto-male limb, despite all the aches and pains it brings, Irwin stated as he looked down onto his hand, the light gleaming off its reflective surface. If anything can be learned by being used as the first subject, then it'll be worth it to see humanity progress. Good for you, you like being a lab rat, Niall said dismissively. Tell me, do you still believe in those childish delusions? Yes, and after everything that's occurred, those delusions are turning into a reality, Irwin replied. Niall, were you aware that Minister Nick was tortured by the MP's first Interior Squad? No, Niall replied, slightly perplexed by Irwin's question. It seems they wanted to know about something, perhaps a secret he let out. Irwin replied, what could they be hiding? I don't have control over what they do, Niall stated. Hell, even I'm just following orders given to me. The Interior MPs are different from us, we have no contact with them and there's no one who exercises official control over them, they're free to act as they wish. Niall, why do you think they've summoned the Elrics to the capital? Irwin asked. Ed turned his head slightly towards Irwin. We've assumed that they want to convince those 2 to join them instead and, no doubt, they'll soon come for Aaron. Do you think the walls would be better served if those 3 were at their disposal instead of the scout regiment? No, Ed thought, answering Irwin's question. It's not my place to think about that, Niall replied, looking away from Irwin. How's Marie? Irwin asked, changing the subject. I hear your 3rd child is on the way. She's fine, Niall replied. I remember you were going to join me in the scout regiment, but instead you fell in love with a girl at our favorite bar and married her. Yeah, I betrayed you all and as a result I'm still alive to this day, Niall replied, but I don't regret it, I'm proud that I have a family. Ed glanced over towards Niall. I never held it against you, Irwin stated. Neither did the soldiers who died before us, we were all happy that you could leave a life we couldn't. But just because you are following orders and protecting your position doesn't mean you're protecting your family. The world we habit is changing, Irwin declared. Hope or despair, who will make that choice? Who will choose and who will you trust? The carriage came to a sudden halt as they arrived at the large metal gates of the chancellery. Ed opened the door and exited the carriage. He looked behind him to see Irwin still talking to Niall. Go on ahead, Edward, Irwin said. Ed walked off past the gate and towards the steps of the chancellery. He observed the building before him. The large pristine white columns held up a triangle-shaped area which was decorated with a large insignia of a white cross on a black field with 2 swords behind it. The front of the building was decorated with large windows and around the large building was open space fenced in by tall walls with sharp pointed end railing. Ed looked behind once more to see Irwin patting Niall on the shoulder and saying a few words before walking off. Ready to go? Irwin asked as he approached Edward. Sure, Commander, Ed replied as they walked up the large set of stairs. They entered into the large building before them through some open, nicely crafted wooden doors. The hall inside was covered in a marble floor, a series of white pillars held up the roof, A large staircase led to the second floor of the building, and people dressed in military uniform and nice clothes walked around being escorted into different areas of the building. Commander Irwin and Edward Elric. Someone called out. They turned to see a man dressed in a black coat and trousers walking up to them. Once you're finished with your talk, meet me back at the entrance. Irwin whispered to him. Ed nodded his head. I'm to escort you two to your respective meetings, said the neatly dressed man with a smile on his face. They followed him up the large set of stairs to the second floor. The second floor was covered in a dark green carpet, and the windows were decorated with cream-colored curtains lined the walls. They walked down the large hallway where a line of doors which led into different rooms. This is where you're needed, Commander Irwin, said the man as they stopped in front of one of the doors and opened it for him. Thank you, Irwin replied as he stepped into the room. Ed peeked inside. There was a large table with 4 old men sat down waiting for Irwin. Your meeting is just down that hall, said their guide as now he and Ed walked further down the hallway. I must say, it is great to see that you've accepted the summons from some of the king's advisors. The guide opened the door for him. Edward walked inside to see 3 old men sitting on one side of a large table. The one on the left was dressed in strangely extravagant clothes and a conservative haircut, looked to be about Ed's height and was rather plump. The man on the right was tall with a skinny face, wore a black coat with a shirt and cravat with a conservative haircut, and the man in the middle was also plump-looking, short, had a round face with large blue eyes and jagged black hair. And he wore black waistcoat over a white shirt. Edward Elric, please sit down, said the man in the middle as he waved him forward. Ed stared at the man as he approached the empty chair in front of him. There was something about him that looked familiar. Those eyes, where have I seen them before? It's good to make your acquaintance, said the man in the middle as he shook Ed's hand. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Rod Rice. Ed felt his stomach drop as he heard his name. He tried to best to remain calm as he stood face to face with the true king of the walls. That's why there was something familiar about him. Ed yelled inside his head Historia's dad. I'm a regional lord of an area in Walsina and the chief advisor to His Royal Majesty King Fritz. Rod finished as Ed sat down on a seat. One truth and a lie. Nice to meet you, Lord Rice. Edward replied. So, why exactly did you summon me to the capital? Straight to the point. His Majesty would find it most advantageous to humanity if you and your brother would lend us your strength. Humanity would truly benefit from your alchemy if placed at the command of the king. Ed narrowed his eyes slightly as he mulled over Rod's words. What does he want from us? Be a little for specific, please. What exactly would my brother and I be doing? Because the way I see it, I'd be taking orders from you. Because the way I see it, we'd likely be carrying out decisions influenced by the Privy Council. Ed said. So, what do you want for humanity? Perceptive. Rod commented. As you know, the situation in the walls is on a cliff's edge. With your help we could establish and maintain order once again. Maintain order? Ed echoed. That's not so different from what I was asked to do as a state alchemist back on my world. Obey the orders and policies of the military. You want us to be your dogs? Well, that's even better seeing as you are experienced. Rod said. Of course you will be rewarded for your service. It's been made privy to us that you and your brother had made a deal with God, saving our lives in exchange for your loved ones. No doubt helping those who govern in humanity's best interest will fulfill your obligation. Here's a question. Why should I believe you guys have humanity's best interests? Edward questioned. The royal government has managed the remnants of humanity for more than a century. Rod stated, and for that century, humanity has survived in the face of the Titans. Surviving? Would you call sending 250,000 people to their death humanity surviving? Ed questioned, catching the 3 off guard. That's a fifth of the population, a mass purge of people. If Walrose was breached tomorrow, would you order half of what's left of humanity to face the Titans? What was done was for the good of humanity, said the man on the left. This time, the people were starving and our efforts to raise more food were failing. We had to make an attempt to recapture Wal Maria. I thought about that, but here's the thing. You guys have had some kind of industrial revolution, seeing as you have factories and the ODM gear shows that you are capable of making advanced machinery. So why is it that the walls continue to use old tech for everything else? Then I saw that the automail research and production was suddenly halted. Ed paused for a second to examine their faces. For some reason the government has been stifling technological progress. Why is this exactly? We don't know what you mean. Rod stated. Don't play dumb with me. How many technological advancements has the royal government halted and for how long? Ed questioned. Why'd the company that was given the rights to produce automail suddenly shutting the whole thing down? Ed interrogated Rod Rice, staring him down as he waited for an answer that never came. The way I see it, you don't have humanity's best interest at heart. Humanity is barely surviving when what they need to be is thriving. You're in the way of progress. Insolent child! Yelled the man on the right. You dare insult us, we should dash. He was abruptly stopped when Rod raised his hand at him. I'm sorry you feel that way, Edward Elric. Rod responded, the ways in which we govern has kept humanity alive for over a century now, and we believe that it is in the interest of everyone that we maintain the current course. That's the problem. Ed replied before he got up from his chair. Sorry to disappoint, but we won't be accepting your invitation. We'll continue working with the Scout Regiment, where we might actually make a difference, and not as your military dogs. He walked out of the room and closed the door behind him, catching one last glance at Rod Rice. Outside the chancellery, Ed leaned up against one of the large pillars as he waited for Irwin to finish his meeting. Edward! Irwin called out as he left the building. Irwin's eyes quickly scanned the area around them as he approached Ed. How'd it go? Commander! I met him, Rod Rice. Ed said in a hushed tone. Irwin didn't flinch, yet the look in his eyes said it all. They tried to convince me that both Alphonse and I should be working for them instead, well, the king instead. What did you say? Irwin asked. I interrogated them about why they halted the automail production and why they stifled technological advancements. They didn't have an answer, only said that what they do was in humanity's best interest. Ed explained. The people in there don't care, the king of the walls doesn't care. They care more about the status and their own lives. Irwin added, maintaining the status quo. I'd hope I was wrong about my assumptions, but it seems they were spot on. So, it's going to happen then? Ed said, alluding to their next option. He looked down onto the ground in his boots. Indeed. Irwin replied. He then took out a piece of paper from his jacket and handed it to Ed. You'll head back with Nifa to the castle, make sure to give Levi this. Ed took the letter from Irwin and slipped it into his jacket. If we fail, then it will end badly for us. Ed commented. Then we best not fail. Irwin replied. Mina pushed open the cell door to see Annie standing at the center of her cell, stretching her arms. The long chains connecting her to the wall rattled slightly. You just woke up? Asked Mina. It's the afternoon. I've pretty much lost all sense of time in here. Annie replied. Guess that's what happens when you haven't seen the sun in a while. I'll see if I can get you a watch. Mina said as she laid down a bowl of soup in front of Annie. Thank you. Annie replied as sat down on the floor and picked up the bowl of soup. What have you been doing? Mina asked as she sat to face Annie. Nothing much, I just sleep, eat, and exercise now that I'm no longer chained so tightly to the wall. Annie replied, before eating a spoonful of soup. You get to talk to me too. Mina added, feigning a saddened tone. That's only when you're not around. Annie replied with a slight smile on her face. The two then giggled at each other. So what have you been up to? Training, lookout duty, and some other stuff. Mina replied, had to watch Aaron do some experiments with his Titan. A few seconds of silence passed between them. Annie, your Titan, how does it make that crystal armor? Has Aaron been trying to do the same thing? Asked Annie, his tone sounding more serious. Shit, maybe I said too much. Mina didn't respond. Her silence was all Annie needed to answer her question. It's an ability of my Titan, each Titan is different, mine is different from Aaron's to Reiner, you get the idea. Annie explained. So Aaron never had a chance? Asked Mina. This time Mina picked on Annie's silence. No, guess he didn't. Annie responded after a few seconds of silence. Annie, what's it like, being a Titan? Mina asked. It can be overwhelming at first. Annie replied, a huge rush of energy and power, and standing over everyone, you almost feel unstoppable. Go for it, hang. Alphonse yelled, standing a couple meters away. Hang knelt down in front of the transmutation circle before her. She took a deep breath inwards, visualizing the atomic structure of the ground and what she wanted to create, and she placed her hands onto the grass. Suddenly blue sparks of lightning danced around the circle, which was quickly followed by a low rumble from the earth. Two massive stone statues burst from the ground before her, one 7 meters and the other 4 meters tall. Yahoo! Hang cried as she jumped into the air. Aren't they beautiful? Way to go, Hang! Alphonse cheered. Next to him the rest of Levi's squad were watching and cheering her as she transmuted large dummy titans from the ground. Sunny and Bean. Petra chuckled as she watched Hang. Of course she made statues of those fucking titans. Levi commented. Alright, Armin, you're up next, said Alphonse, placing his hand on Armin's shoulder. Are you sure you want to try out flame alchemy now? Armin clutched the box of matches in his hand. On the front of the box was a transmutation circle. Yes, we have to put the research into practice. He opened the box and took out a match before walking off into the field, a row of straw dummies in front of him. They're making good progress, Levi commented as he stood next to Alphonse. Yeah, they're fast learners and their willingness to learn more is only helping them improve, Alphonse replied, beaming with pride. I hope they'll be able to teach others in the future. Armin stared at the straw dummies with his concentration being on visualizing a path towards his targets. He placed the match head on the striker. Straight head, small burst of fire. Armin muttered to himself. Alphonse placed one foot forward slightly, ready to move in case something went wrong. Armin skid the matched head against the striker and almost immediately a large explosion of flames burst from the air. It missed the straw dummies and instead set fire to the trees 10 meters behind it. The force of the explosion had knocked Armin off his feet and onto the ground. Alphonse quickly ran in to help him while the others could only stand back and watch horrified as the large uncontrollable fire began to spread. Get some water, Levi ordered. His squad quickly scuttled back into the castle and towards the nearby well. Alphonse sprinted towards the fire before coming to a complete halt. He clapped his hands together before slammed them onto the ground. A large wall rose from the forest and encircled the burning trees. A massive cloud of thick dark smoke rose from the circle as the cackling sound of flames filled the air. Alphonse jogged towards Armin, still on the ground watching the scene before him in shock. Alphonse picked Armin up from the ground. You alright, Armin? He asked. Where did I go wrong? Armin muttered to himself. His voice was a mixture of disbelief and sadness. I thought. Alphonse embraced Armin lightly, reassuringly tapping him on the back. It didn't work out the way you wanted, but you came further than I had expected, Alphonse said. For that you should be proud. He moved back slightly to come face to face with him. It's alright if you want to end this, no one will judge you for it. Armin turned his head slightly and looked towards the ground. A few hours had passed since the experiment and both Levi and Hank's squad met back into the mess hall of the castle. Both Ed and Nifa had returned from the capital. Alphonse quickly noticed it. Ed had a glum expression on his face as he leaned up against the table next to where Captain Levi was sitting. Looks like it's going to happen, Al, was the first thing Ed had told him when he got back from the capital. So you met him? Rod Rice? Hang asked as she read the letter from Irwin. Yeah, he wanted us to join his side, Ed replied. What did you say? Levi asked, turning his head slightly towards Ed. Just the polite version of, fuck you and everything you stand for, Ed replied. Not bad, Levi remarked. Does he know that we know about the secret of the Rice family? Armin inquired. No, he introduced himself as the king's chief advisor. The bastard is hiding in plain sight. And now we're clear on what he looks like, Levi said. Hang handed the note other to Petra, who then passed it towards Jean, and so on. Each one of them who read the note had a look on their face which ranged from shock to anxious. Alphonse knew exactly what was written on that note, and he knew what Ed had alluded to just a moment ago. Armin handed it to Alphonse. He read the letter. On it was one simple yet daunting task. Overthrow the royal government. Alphonse handed the note back to Levi, who placed it over the lit candle and left it to burn on an empty plate. That means Historia has to become the queen, Armin stated hesitantly. All eyes quickly fell on Historia. Her face had turned almost snow-white as her eyes glanced around at everyone in disbelief. Seems like the natural conclusion to our mission. Hang added, it sounded as if she felt guilty for agreeing with it as she looked at Historia. I can't. Historia stammered, I can't become queen. Not a lot of people would want to take the role as humanity's ruler. I accept that you're scared right now, I'd probably shit myself too. But it doesn't matter, if that's the end result then you will do your part. I'm unfit to be K-. Doesn't matter, do it. Levi quickly interjected, you promised the commander that should you be needed in the future then you'd commit yourself fully to it, so if becoming queen is what it takes then do it. Both Alphonse and Edward looked at Historia with pity. For years they've known people who wanted to be her of Ames tries or the ruler of Seeing and would have done anything to achieve that goal. Instead here before them was someone who was terrified about the idea of being the ruler of humanity. Historia, nothing is set in stone yet, Hang quickly interjected, trying to ease the anxiety. So it may be the case that you won't be queen, just try and mental prepare yourself for the possibility for now. Is that her? Asked the guy watching the short blonde-haired girl as she went around looking at the stalls in the Trost market. Fits the description. Said his counterpart, come on, let's follow, she might lead us to the errand. The two blended into the crowd as they watched Historia walk along the main road. Along the way they met up with more of their accomplices. 4 men now began to trail her as she made her way through a narrow alleyway towards an abandoned warehouse in the rougher end on the district. They 4 men made sure to look as though they were minding their own business, idly chatting about the day and even a few of them walking past her. She met up with a boy who had short brown hair. That's Aaron, whispered one of the men. This is almost too easy, whispered another as they followed the two to an abandoned warehouse. Why would they leave those 2 alone without protection? Questioned another. The 4 men snuck into the warehouse. 2 of them had taken out a small length of rope while the others took out batons from their side. They quietly moved around, hiding behind the large boxes stacked around the wide space. They watched as the 2 rummaged through a few small wooden crates. They crept up behind them. Alphonse watched from on top of a stack of large crates as the 4 would-be kidnappers crept up on Jean and Armin. He turned towards Levi and Petra who were perched on other stacks of boxes, ready to pounce on them. Go now. Levi ordered as he leapt from the box. He came crashing down into one of the kidnappers and quickly pinned him to the ground. Petra slammed her heel onto the temple of his nearby accomplice and Alphonse kneed the back of the 3rd. The 4th guy charged at Alphonse with his baton. He swung it towards his head. Alphonse quickly ducked under, dodging the attack. He punched the attacker in the gut before grabbing him by the throat and slamming him onto the ground. Alphonse clapped his hands together and placed them onto the ground. The ground then enveloped them of men as Jean and Armin tied up the others. Sasha and Mina zipped down from the roof of the warehouse and jogged towards Levi and Petra. Was that all of them? Levi asked. That was all of them, sir. Sasha replied. Good, tell Connie that the 3 of you are to do a sweep of the perimeter. Make sure nobody else gets to this warehouse. Levi instructed. He then turned to the 4 men lying on the ground as both Sasha and Mina went back onto the roof. Now, we can make this easy for all us and just tell me who your boss is. The 4 of them said nothing. Okay then. Levi said, I guess this is how it's going to be. He grabbed one of the men by the collar and dragged him into an empty room connected to the warehouse. Alphonse, stay close, I'll call when you're needed. He said as he took out a pair of gloves from a bag. Petra, bring the bag of gold to Gelger. The address for the meeting point is in the bag and be discreet. Yes, Captain. Petra replied as she picked up the small brown bag and headed out of the warehouse. Alphonse was left alone with the 3 captured men. He looked back at the closed door which Levi had dragged one of them into. I may need to rearrange some faces if they don't talk, so you'll need to help patch them up after I'm done. Levi's instructions to him before they left the castle still echoed in his head. His memory of Levi's words was quickly interrupted by the sound of muffled scream behind the door. The screaming went on for minutes. I don't know anything, yelled the guy, his voice muffled through the door. Alphonse could vaguely make out the sound of Levi's voice before the tortured man once more began to let out a pained cry. Daimo, it's Daimo Reeves, yelled one of the captured men next to Alphonse. He turned to look at them and saw a look of complete fear on their faces. None of them wanted to be tortured. Alphonse ran up to the door and pounded his fist onto it. "Captain," one of the men confessed, "they've been hired by Dymo Reeves." Alphonse yelled. The screaming on the other side of the door came to an abrupt and was quickly followed by a whimpered cry. The door slowly opened before Alphonse to reveal a bloodied and bruised man with his head lying in a small pool of blood. Alphonse stared at the man for a few seconds, aghast at his condition and damage Levi had inflicted. "Good," Levi replied as he took off the gloves, "now see what you can do for him." Levi was about to walk past when Alphonse grabbed his wrist, holding it tightly, catching Levi off guard. "Captain, don't you think you went too far?" Alphonse questioned as the two made eye contact with each other. Levi looked away from Alphonse. "Maybe, but we got the name of their boss, we've made headway towards our goal and that should be what matters." In one swift motion, Levi freed his wrist from Alphonse's grasp. "Now, if you don't mind, we all have a job to do and I suggest you get on with yours." "Door's open, you can come in," yelled a man from inside the room. Levi opened the door to a nicely decorated office with shelves of books covering one side of the wall and a large polished wood desk in front of a large window overlooking the district of Trost. Behind the desk sat a large man who looked to be in his 40s, balding with a thin beard and wore a black leather coat over a gray vest. "Dymo Reeves," Levi said. "Captain Levi, to what do I owe the pleasure of this surprise visit?" Dymo asked. His tone was a mixture of courtesy and sarcasm. Levi sat down on an empty chair on the opposite side of his desk and placed a slip of paper in front of him. "Commander Irwin has ordered that you be arrested for acting against humanity," Levi said, almost nonchalantly. "What?" Dymo yelled, standing up from his chair. "What, on what grounds?" "I've done nothing wrong," he declared. "We've got a confession from the thugs you hired to capture Historia and Aaron," Levi stated. "You wanted to take one of humanity's greatest assets from the Scout Regiment, undermining our efforts to defeat the Titans." The only response from Dymo was the sound of his teeth grinding in frustration. "Of course, you don't have to spend your days under our custody," Levi suggested. "You could tell me who you work for." Dymo sat back down onto the chair. "I'm fucked either way it seems," Dymo remarked. "Royal government got me by my neck, threatened to seize the company, leave hundreds of my staff unemployed and have me and my subordinates killed for good measure. They're making me do this. And if you don't follow through, the interior MPs would come crashing down on you," Levi said. "Yeah, but I guess we never had a chance against you, did we?" Dymo chuckled. "How the hell do we beat people who kill Titans for a living? The people in the interior can be completely oblivious to everything outside of Walsina. Yet you follow their orders," Levi replied. "Everything will go to shit otherwise," Dymo stated. "They've got the power in this world and there's nothing I can do otherwise." "Not unless you join us," Levi suggested. "You want me to betray the interior MPs and the royal government?" Dymo questioned in almost complete disbelief. "You must be insane." Levi got up to his chair and walked towards the large glass window and stood next to Dymo as he looked out into Trost District. Dymo flinched slightly as humanity's strongest soldier stood mere inches away from him. Trost District is a symbol of humanity's victory against the Titans but also its weakness against them. "We only won that battle because a newly graduated cadet turned into a Titan and some random god took enough pity on us to send two people with strange powers to our aid." Dymo turned away from Levi and looked out into the city. "But it's a city that's dying, even with that little act of kindness from the Elrics. Nobody wants to live in a city that was attacked by Titans, and if the Reeves Company disappears then the only people left in Trost would be beggars and soldiers." Levi paused for a second. "But what if I said we had a few new tech ideas that could not only keep this city alive but have it and your company booming? And all we need to do it make a change in government." Dymo looked at Levi with an incredulous look. Levi glanced back at Dymo. "Alchemy isn't the only thing those two know. And what exactly would we have to do in exchange for that?" Dymo questioned. "Just a few things, one being your full support and trust in future," Levi stated, "two being that the Scout Regiment becomes a priority customer to the Reeves Company, meaning access to luxury good and products, and third being your help in a mission we're planning." "And what will that be?" "Capturing the head of the interior MPs." Once they had gotten back from Trost, Armin went back into the library and pored through his notes as he tried to find out how and where he went wrong. went a pen in hand he began editing his research and writing in suggestions on what could be improved. He leaned back on his chair and sighed to himself. Control, he thought, I need to find a way to control it. He picked up the matchbox at his side and began examining the transmutation circle drawn on it. Are there different types of this alchemy? If so, which one have I got? He wrote a small mention next to the transmutation circle on his notes: larger flame attack. What is the more precise one? Hey, Armin called out a person in the library. Armin turned his head to see Hang walking towards him, still doing some studying. She then sat down opposite to him. I'm trying to figure out where I went wrong, if it's a mistake I've made in my research or if, maybe I'm not cut out for it. Armin said, sounding disheartened. Hey, cheer up, nobody said we'd be masters at this in the space of a couple days. Hang said, trying to encourage him, and you're basically entering a whole new field for you and Alphonse, you'll get better in time. She finished as she took out a small notebook. What do you think of this? Said Hang, passing the small book to Armin. I've been trying to make large structure, I figured it'll help us in base building when we got back outside the walls. Armin took the book from Hang and began reading through her notes. The pages were filled with detailed diagrams of walls and small buildings alongside entire pages worth of breakdown of different materials and elements. Hang, this is amazing. Armin exclaimed as he flicked through the pages. Thanks you. Hang replied with a beaming smile. As Armin flicked through the pages he came across something which caught his eye. Philosopher's Stone. There was little written under the heading, but what had caught his interest. Underneath was a sentence saying, bypass laws of equivalent exchange, and next to it, something evil. Hang, what's a Philosopher's Stone? I don't really know, Hang replied. Ed and Al only explained the basics of it but didn't want to go any further than that. They said it was something evil and only a monster would create such a thing, going so far as to say they would never use one even if they had it. Armin thought about what Hang had told him, something that powerful yet they'd refuse to use it. Thank you, Hang, said Armin as he handed the book back to Hang. Later that day, Armin found Alphonse him in his room, he sitting down next to a window reading through a small notebook. Hello, Armin, said Alphonse as he saw he enter through his door. Hey Al, what are you reading? Armin asked. Just some stuff I've been doing on medical alchemy. Alphonse replied as he slipped the book into his trouser pocket. What'd like to talk about? I read through Hang's notebook and found out about something called a Philosopher's Stone. It wasn't hard for Armin to tell that Alphonse had quickly become uncomfortable when he mentioned it. What is it exactly? It's something you don't need to know. Alphonse replied. Why? Asked Armin. Why don't we need to know about it? From what little Hang wrote about it, it said the Philosopher's Stone could bypass the laws of equivalent exchange, and the only other thing was that it was something evil. Would you at least consider making one? No, I'm not going to consider it. Alphonse replied in a stern tone. Because it is something evil. Alphonse, the people we're fighting don't care about that. Armin stated, what Reiner, Berthold, and Annie did 5 years ago was evil and yet they still did it. What the interior MPs did to Pasternak was evil and yet they still did it, and what the royal government did to those 250,000 people, my own grandfather included, was evil and yet they still did it. Do you know what a Philosopher's Stone is made out of? Alphonse questioned, a hint of anger in his voice. People. The souls of people, trapped and used for nothing but alchemic energy. I'm not going to condemn anyone to that kind of fate. I'm not asking you to make one right now, I'm asking that you don't disregard the option so readily. Armin stated, his tone mimicking Alphonse's. The two stared at each other for a second before Armin spoke again. Have you ever used one? He asked. Alphonse hesitated for a second before answering yes. He admitted, we didn't have a choice in those moments. So you admit there were moments where both you and Ed had no other choice but to use them? Armin replied, don't you think that same thing might happen here? We'll find another way. Alphonse responded, looking away from Armin. I once told Jean something, if we are to defeat monsters then we must be able to abandon our humanity, and if we refuse to throw away anything then we won't be able to change anything. Armin stated. You yourself even said that humanity advances if we could break free from rules and laws. That is not what I meant. Alphonse. exclaimed, "I meant pushing the boundaries of established principles and not being forced to choose between terrible options and instead finding another way. I guess we have different interpretations on what it means to move forward." Armin replied. "Is this really what you're planning on doing, Erwin?" Pixis asked as he rubbed his face with his hand as he pondered over Erwin's declaration. "You really plan on overthrowing the royal government and the king?" "Yes," he replied, his tone was resolute. "You realize what this means? You could start a civil war inside these walls and damn all of humanity to ruin. If you were to remove the king, do you think everyone will rally behind you?" Pixis questioned. "The powers that have governed the people for over a century is not widely hated. Yes, the situation is terrible, but yet public support for them hasn't collapsed because everyone within these walls are bound together by a terrible fate. We are all cornered by the Titans and forced into this cramped world. To go to war would mean destroying what will we have left. How could you ever go against that, and how could you ever change this world without spilling a bottomless lake of blood?" "We can," Erwin declared. "We'll replace the current king and get the support of the vast majority of people. The only thing that will stand in our way is the interior MPs and the royal government itself." "Was it the scout regiment that let out classified information?" Pixis questioned, yet he knew full well what the answer to that question was. "That was reckless, Erwin. It was a gamble that paid off." Erwin replied, "Neither the interior MPs nor the government will go after us, at least for now." "And you have information that would turn the people against their king?" Pixis asked, curiously. "Yes, over the course of these couple of days new information has been revealed to us. The first was revealed to us by Pastor Nick, who said that the current royal family who sit on the throne is nothing more than a pretender king, and the real king of these walls is Rod Rice, a regional lord in Walsena, and the second comes from our captured shifter Annie Leonhardt, who confessed that Aaron's Titan has the ability to not only control Titans but also the vast majority of people within these walls. And as you'd know, someone in the capital has been trying to take Aaron from the scout regiment since his appearance in Trost. It's all too likely that the reason is to acquire the power of the coordinate." Erwin paused for a second to allow these revelations to sink in. "This also confirms my father's theory. 107 years ago, the first king of the walls had altered the memories of what was left of mankind to better control them. This changes things." Pixis remarked, "We had first believed that they wanted to kill those three in the courthouse. We resisted because it was foolish to put the hopes of mankind to death. This means they wanted to capture Aaron but found no need for the Elrics. If seems as though they had." Erwin replied, lowered his head slightly as he recounted those events. "Just recently they had been summoned to the Chancellery with me to meet with members of the Privy Council. Ed went to meet them and was faced with Rod Rice, who introduced himself as the king's advisor." "And what did he say?" Pixis asked. "They wanted to use the Elrics as nothing more than enforcers for their rule and argued that things must remain the same as it's how we've all survived up until now." Erwin replied, "They don't care for humanity, not even the king cares for us." Erwin's eyes looked back up at Pixis. "My father was killed for trying to discover the truth, and they killed him to protect the status quo. We cannot hand over Aaron to them." "Erwin, if you plan on replacing the king of the walls, how and who will take his place?" asked Pixis. "Discovering the identity of the true royal family has led to an important revelation," Erwin announced. "Rod Rice had an illegitimate daughter who happens to be a member of the Scout Regiment. We will tell the people the truth of this world they've lived in for centuries and install Historia Rice as queen of the new regime." Chapter 35, Crimes Not Committed. At the heart of the Chancellery is a grand hall. A large throne stands at the head of the hall upon an elevated floor of marble, polished to reflective shine, with crimson-red curtains covering the enormous windows that flanked the seat of power, and a small table holding a red cushion on which a golden crown rested, upon which shone as the light from the candles hit its shiny surface. On the seat of the throne and next to the crown was an old man, dressed in fine silks. He sat with his elbow resting on armrest and his clenched fist holding his head. He drifted between sleep and consciousness as he watched as the king and the members of the assembly sat upon smaller chairs were engaged in a heated debate. "Have we gotten any word back from Dymo Reeves?" asked one of the men, a large man dressed in extravagant clothes. "Nothing yet, no word on whether he had successfully apprehended either Aaron Yeager or Historia Rice," Rod replied, leaning forward in his chair. "If Reeves is unsuccessful in his mission, then we will have to quickly dispose of him and find another way to go about capturing them. We don't have the time for that." exclaimed another. He was dressed in the black robes and iron necklace of the clergy, with an anxious look on his face. Right now, as we speak, Commander Irwin and the Scout Regiment is apprehending our allies and trying to uncover the secrets of the walls. Who knows what Nick had told them before the Interior MPs got to him. This wouldn't have happened if you had kept your composure during the meeting, commented one of the men. You and those damn noblemen gave it away. We had to placate Irwin to lower any suspicions he had. Now he's on our trail and has enough power to start digging. If Nick is anything to go by, then he's seeking out all the right people to find his answers, said Rod. Our spies have said that he's had meetings with ranking members of the garrison, including Commander Pixis, said the tall man dressed in smart clothes. If I had to guess, then I'd say he has the information he wants and is now organizing a coup against the government. Not like we have any evidence of that, and even if we did, we still couldn't act, stated the large man. The bastard got it in everyone's head that the royal government has been undermining the recent success of the Scout Regiment. If we act against him in such a manner, then the walls would turn into chaos. Or worse, we may have a civil war to deal with, added another. What should we do? Asked one of the men, throwing the question to the group. There's very little we can do, Rod admitted. I had hoped that by offering the Elrics an easier path towards their goal, they'd join us and help re-establish order in these walls while we'd capture Aaron and Historia, but it seems they may be dedicated to the cause of overthrowing us. That means we have more than the scouts to contend with, said a member of the assembly. Should we somehow eliminate Irwin Smith and his subordinates, then it's likely the Elric brothers would continue to resist us. That being said, it seems as though they are unaware of the political capital they have by virtue of their arrival. If word got out that they were sent here by some kind of divine deity, that kind of influence could spark a revolution within its own right. Damn it all, the large man exclaimed as he clenched his fists. Our backs are up against the wall and all our current efforts have yet to succeed. Yikes, with leadership like this I'm surprised humanity has gone to shit already, said a voice coming from the doors. The group of men turned their heads towards the door to see a tall man, with a slender build, wearing a long black coat and bowler hat covering most of his face. He flicked his hat upwards slightly, revealing his long face and rough brown hair and beard. Captain Ackerman, to what do we owe the pleasure of your appearance? Said one of the assembly members. Well, my lord, he replied in a mocking tone of voice, I couldn't help but overhearing ya talking about your current predicament. Sounds like y'all are caught in a shitty situation and you ain't got the toilet paper to clean yourselves up, he said as he strutted his way towards them. Everyone you hire is either too incompetent to do their jobs or you can't touch a hair on that bush. Irwin calls his eyebrows without making half the walls upset. We're quite aware of the situation, Rod replied. From his voice it was clear he was annoyed. What exactly do you propose then? Kenny stared at Rod for a few seconds before a wide grin began to form on his lips. Why, it's simple, your highness, just some out-of-the-box thinking. Instead of going for the whole scout regiment, why not just goes after the guys who are immediately in your way? The way he spoke suggested that the idea was so obvious. They used the stories of Leonhardt's capture and the Battle of Stohess to get the regiment in the good graces of the masses and, by extension, Irwin, who's the face of the scouts. So why not instead muddy the image of the people who guard Aaron and Historia, the Special Operations Unit? And how do you propose we do that? Asked one of the assembly members. Leave that to me, he replied in a tone which they could only assume was trying to reassure them. I got it covered. He slips his hand into his coat pocket and pulls out a badge. The rough edges and loose strings connected to it suggested that the badge had been torn from its waistcoat. The blue and white wings of the Scout Regiment with the post listening, Special Operations Unit, on display for all in the room to see. The guys I took it from didn't need it anyway, on account of them being corpses, he remarked as he slipped the badge back into his pocket with a sly wink to Rod Rice. Very well, we will leave it to you, Rod replied. In the brightly lit hallways of the Chancellery, Kenny leaned up against the wall staring at the ground with a bored expression on his face as he waited beside the door for the king to let him in. The rattling of the door handle and the click of the lock caught his attention as Rod opened the door, peering through the small crack. Come in, he said as he allowed Kenny to enter. Kenny walked into the room. He observed the office which Rod occupied. There was nothing special about his workspace, some fancy furniture and nice carpets to match the curtains covering If anyone had entered it, they never would have guessed that this is where the king worked in the chancellery. "Take a seat, Kenny." The tone in Rod's voice was cold and unwelcoming. "Thanks, Your Majesty," Kenny replied in an almost disrespectful manner as he took his seat at Rod's desk. "So this plan of yours, how do you intend to go about it?" Rod asked as he peered through the window in his office. Kenny lifted his legs up and rested them onto the desk as he leaned back in his chair. "Gonna have to cut a few throats, all of them Bane from big-named people, then use the badges to frame the Special Ops unit." "Like who?" Rod asked, glancing back to Kenny. "One guy that comes to mind is the mayor of Stohess," Kenny replied. "Recent attack on the government building and the poor bastard getting roughed up by some thugs, we could probably pin it and his murder on them. It would put Commander Irwin in a difficult position, condemn the Special Operations Unit, and in extension the Elrics, or side with a bunch of criminals and traitors to the crown." Rod added. "That's the idea too," Kenny replied. "So, do I have the okay on this?" "Yes," Rod replied, glancing back at Kenny with a cold look on his face. "Pleasure doing business with ya, Rod," Kenny replied as he lifted his feet off of Rod's desk and onto the ground, making his way out of his office. "Kenny," Rod called out just as Kenny's fingers touched the doorknob. "I'm putting a kill order on Elric Brothers. I want you and the Interior MPs to eliminate them." "Sure," Kenny responded as he opened the door. Outside in the hallway he found his second-in-command waited patiently for him. She had been staring outside of the window at the clear night sky and the busy streets of the capital. "Captain Ackerman," she said as she placed a clenched fist over her chest. "Yeesh, you don't have to do all that saluting crap with me," Kenny said, waving his hand dismissively. "So what brings you here?" She handed him a letter from Dymo Reeves. Kenny took the letter from her and read its contents. "So Dymo managed to do it, huh?" Kenny said, skepticism in his voice. "Oh, and look at that, he wants me to meet him with Aaron and Historia at the abandoned mines, and he's even kind enough to provide most of the security for the transfer." "You think it's a trap?" Trot asked. "Of course it is, ya idiot," Kenny replied. "Levi must have got to him and Dymo must have cut a deal with the scouts." He waved her along, signaling to follow him. "Still, it'd be rude to refuse, and hopefully we'd be able to take out Levi's squad in the process. Fighting both Levi and the Elrics will be a challenge," Trot commented. "Trying to kill them will be tough." Kenny responded, a sinister grin then began to form on his face. "Killing Levi and capturing the Elrics will be tougher though." Trot looked up at Kenny a little surprised. "Killing those two would be a waste, so I say we capture one of them. Who knows, they just might be important to helping us realize the grand dream." "What the plan then, Captain?" Trot asked. "We know where Levi and his team are sleeping, right?" Kenny asked. "Yes, sir," Trot replied. "I'm gonna need you and a bunch of our guys to sneak into their base," Kenny ordered. "Once inside, try to get a feel for the place and keep your eyes on the targets. I doubt Levi would really send Aaron and Historia to those mines. Also try to find out where they're keeping Leonhardt too." "I won't be accompanying you to the ambush, Captain," asked Trot. "It might be dangerous, taking on Levi and the Elrics even with the others backing you up." "I'll be fine," Kenny replied. "Everything that midget knows, I taught him, and I can handle a bunch of kid soldiers. Now, if you don't mind, I have a meeting with the mayor tomorrow night." "Come in," said a voice on the other side of the door. Kenny gently pushed the door open and walked into the mayor's office. "Captain Ackerman, it's good to finally meet you," he said as he shook Kenny's hand. The mayor was a large man, fed off his wealth and power, with a thin mustache above his lips and short black hair, and wore smart dark clothes over a white shirt. "Sure, so let's get down to it. Tell me what happened that night you got attacked," Kenny asked as he sat down onto an empty chair. "Yes, it was not that long ago. There was an attack near government building. Most of our security left to intercept and control the fire at the warehouse. The thugs managed to enter the building, found his way into my office, and then threatened me to keep quiet about what happened during the Titans' attack on Walrose." "Anything specific or any idea why?" Kenny asked. "No, he just said to keep quiet about the whole thing," the mayor replied. Any kind of description to add? Kenny asked. He was wearing ODM gear, so he must be a soldier or perhaps has some kind of connection to the military. Would you say he looked like this? Kenny asked as he handed him a portrait of Levi. That's Captain Levi, replied the mayor. You've seen him before? Yes, he usually around Commander Irwin. I wouldn't say it was him. Levi is rather short while the man who attacked me was about average height and had brown hair slicked back unlike Levi's black hair. Alright, it's not much to go on but we'll work with it, Kenny said as he got up from his chair and walked over to the mayor. Thank you, Captain Ackerman. The mayor replied as he got up to thank him. The two shook hands and they looked at each other. Rest assured, Mayor, Kenny replied. We will find your murderer. My Muirdesh. Kenny quickly pulled the mayor closer to him, while slipping his left hand into his jacket pocket and with almost disgusting ruthlessness he slit his throat. The mayor tried to scream yet Kenny quickly covered his mouth and held him close as the life quickly poured down his open neck and onto his clothes and the floor. As soon as Kenny let go of him did the mayor's lifeless body collapse onto the ground. Kenny knelt down beside him and placed Scout badge into his hand before closing it. Gently and carefully, Kenny began to mess up his office, the chair lying on the ground, a few books scattered across the room, a broken shelf and a bloody knife. It's for a grand dream. In the dimly lit cell, underneath the castle, Annie practiced her kicks as far as the chains would allow. She tried to thrust her leg upwards while visualizing the rest of her actions. Her body was drenched in sweat as she sat down onto the floor as she took a short break to heal her ankle which had been bruised from the metal cuffs. Soon, she thought, I'll find my opening. The sound of approaching footsteps catches her attention. Mina, about the only other person that visits her aside from the guards. Mina opened the cell door and walked inside. In her hands were a bucket of water and a small piece of cloth. She laid them before Annie sat down while Annie placed the wet cloth over her face to cool down. How's your day been? Annie asked as she wiped around her neck. The usual, just guard duty and training. Mina replied. From the way she spoke it seemed as though she was upset about something. What's wrong? She asked. It's nothing, Mina said. No it's not, what's on your mind? Annie probed. Armin had an argument with Alphonse about something and they've been a bit distant now. Mina said, it's just sad to see them like this. I want them to be friends again. They were good friends and it's been hard for them. Hard for him, huh? So which one of them do you like? Annie asked, catching Mina off guard. It upsets you to see them like this, seeing him in a bad mood. I do not, Mina replied defensively. It's not Armin, you were just friendly with him, Aaron and Mikasa during the cadet corps, so it's Alphonse. Annie deduced. Infatuated with the guy who saved you in Trost, huh? How corny. She teased. Oh shut it. Mina replied, a flash of red appearing on her cheeks. You know, Berthold had a thing for you. Did he? Annie said, slightly perplexed. I never knew. Really? Mina questioned. He was always staring at you. Huh. I never knew you felt that way, Berthold. You guys must have been close for years. Mina said. Since before you came here? Yeah. Annie replied, looking at the ground somberly. We were maybe 10 or 11 when we... She stopped, not wanting to finish her sentence. Were there more of you? Mina asked. Other shifters who came here. Other shifters? Did they send Zeke and Pike? They don't know about Marcel. No, there was another guy with us but he died along the way. Annie said. What happened? Mina asked. A Titan ate him. She replied. 5 meter. Mina flinched slightly as she looked to be slightly shaken by what Annie told her. She assumed that Mina must have been disgusted by the idea of a small child being eaten by a Titan. What did it look like? Mina asked, her voice shaking slightly. Weird question. 5 meters tall, long messy black hair and black eyes with a big head. Inside the library, Alphonse observed Hang as she practiced manipulating the fragmented pieces of a blade into different shapes and objects. Nice work, Hang. Al complimented as he admired the small metal swan that had been made from the broken pieces of a flesh-paring blade. Thank you, Alphonse. Hang replied as she picked up the swan and began to admire her own handiwork. Have you been able to practice performing alchemy at a faster pace? I'm getting there, having to come up with all the correct equations, elements, and amounts in the space of seconds is pretty tricky. Hang replied. Don't worry, you're making good progress. Alphonse assured her. Okay, let's move on to dash. Suddenly the library door slammed open, interrupting Alphonse and stealing their attention. It was Mina. Sorry you guys, squad leader Hang, I think I might have found out something important from Annie. Alright, we'll discuss this in my study. Hang said as she got up from the table. We'll have to do this another time, Alphonse. Of course, Alphonse replied. Hang quickly left the room. Al could hear them jog down the hallway as the sound of their running echoed off the stone walls. He began to organize his notes and leave when a knock on the open door caught his attention. He turned to see Armin at the doorway, holding a bunch of papers in his hands. The two stared at each other for a few seconds in silence, waiting to see who would talk first. Hello, Al. Armin was the first to speak. Hello, Armin. Alphonse replied. The tension in the room was uncomfortable for both of them. Armin stepped inside and sat opposite to Alphonse. Alphonse, I've been giving it some thought and I want to say that accept your judgment on it. He didn't want to say it was, but the two knew exactly what he was talking about. You're right in saying that it's something evil, that's not up for debate. I want to believe that we'll defeat Reiner, Berthold, the Beast Titan and whoever's behind this without having to resort to such a terrible weapon. Alphonse sighed softly as a feeling of relief came over him at what Armin had said. I'm glad you feel that way, Armin. If those three are really what stands in our way, if they're the biggest challenge we have to overcome, then I think we'll be able to do this without having to sacrifice our humanity. Armin sighed slightly and with that Alphonse felt his heart drop. We know so little about the enemy and we don't know if those three really are the best that they can throw at us. I'm scared that what we're facing now will only be the beginning of our problems, or that whoever or whatever is trying to kill humanity might have some kind of immense power that we can't match. Armin and Alphonse both looked each other in the eyes. Alphonse didn't like what Armin was saying, but he could tell neither did Armin. We shouldn't have to use something like that, but at the same time, we shouldn't totally rule it out. Alphonse took in a deep breath before gently sighing. Armin, in the past my brother and our friends had to face people who had more stronger and more powerful than us. We didn't have to do terrible things unless only absolutely necessary. We had to fight a person who tried to be God. Trust me when I say that I doubt there's anything the Beast Titan has or this world has that can match us. Alphonse knew that the task ahead of them would be immense, but he believed that we'll eventually overcome it. The most dangerous threat to them seemed only to be the Titans. If we can find a way to beat them or maybe turn them back into humans, then we'd have left these people being better off. I hope you're right, Alphonse. Armin replied as he laid out his notes. I know so. Alphonse declared with a soft smile. So, let's get down to it. Anything new on your research? I've been going over what went wrong and I think I know why. A slight modification to the transmutation circle will either result in explosions or flames. Interesting. I remember Roy Mustang had two gloves which differed on the type of flames he produced. Alphonse mentions. So that must be it. Armin replied, of course, now we have to find out what changes need to be made. Alright then, so we know what we have to do. Alphonse replied as he went over the flame circle. In the large mess hall, Levi's squad and Hang's team leaders met once more to discuss their next move. Accompanying them was Daimo Reeves and his son Flegel. Some sat down while others stood up as they waited for everyone to arrive. Good work, Nifa, Levi said as he handed her a mug of water. I know it must not be easy to make those night runs. Thank you, Captain. Nifa replied as she wiped her mouth. So Hang can't make it? Levi asked as he turned to his squad. No sir, she left to relay the information I got to Commander Irwin. Mina replied. Levi sighed, right before we this. Damn it, shitty glasses. Levi remarked. Alright, let's get started then. So the Reeves Company has agreed to work alongside us in our plans and have helped set up the next mission. The group all turned towards Daimo and Flegel, who had sat silently. Thank you for the trust, soldier. Daimo replied, I hope you'll honor your end of the agreement. We will, that I can promise. Levi replied. Hope you don't mind me bringing my son along. Daimo said as he placed his hand roughly on top of Flegel's head. No, it's fine, Levi replied. If he's with the company then we can trust him like I trust you. Welcome Flegel, hope you're comfortable. He said in an almost dull tone, while not comforting was a stark difference from his usual intimidating one. Levi huh? Flegel replied, if you wanted to make us feel comfortable then how about some snacks? Everyone in the room looked at Flegel, shocked that this chubby young guy could be extremely rude to humanity's strongest soldier. Daimo slapped his slap on the back of his head. Sorry, kid, still got a lot to learn, we'll leave if you want, so just quickly fill us in. It's fine. Levi replied. What we're planning here is the decisive next steps in our mission. Levi shifted his head slightly towards Historia, who had been sitting quietly next to Armin and Jean. Historia, have you come to terms with the whole Queen of the Walls role? Historia didn't respond at first, instead she balled her hands into a fist and took a deep breath as if she was summoning her courage. No. She stated, all eyes suddenly fell on her. I won't accept it, I can't be the Queen of Humanity. Even though you promised the commander that, if needed, you will carry out any role that was needed of you. Levi questioned, his voice was still calm. I didn't think it would involve me becoming the ruler of humanity. Historia retorted, you're asking for too much. Levi then approached her, you're right, we are asking for too much, but you seem to be mistaken on one thing. He stopped, coming face to face with her. The tension in the room was now boiling over as everyone waited for something to happen. That you have a choice in this matter. He then grabbed Historia by her collar and raised her from her seat, held her up into the air, suffocating her as she struggled to break free. Almost everyone in the room watched, both shocked and scared, as Levi began to manhandle her. If you don't want to be queen then run, fight, do everything you possibly can to stop us, because we won't stop until your ass is sitting on that throne. Captain, stop this. Connie urged. I guess this is how it's going to be. Levi said. If you don't like it then fight back. Suddenly Levi felt a hand grip his shoulder tightly. He turned to see Ed look down at him, anger written all over his face. Let go. Ed growled as his hand's grip on Levi's shoulder tightens. The team leaders began to move in until Levi held up hand, signaling them to stand back. Levi dropped Historia onto the floor, causing her to fall onto her knees as she began to violently cough. Her friends quickly went to check on her. Ed turned his head back to see if she was okay. Suddenly he felt his wrist come under intense pain as he turned his head back to Levi, grabbing Ed's arm as he tried to remove Ed's hand from his shoulder. The two of them glared at each other as neither wanted to back down. Despite the pressure Levi was placing on Ed's wrist, Ed was refusing to let up. Let go, Ed. Levi ordered. Make me. Ed replied, grimacing from the pain. All right. With his free hand Levi grabbed Ed's collar, pulled his forward, then pushed him, sending Ed crashing into the ground. Levi's squad's attention quickly turned from Historia and to Ed and Levi. Ed quickly got off the floor. He turned his attention quickly back to Levi and marched over to him. Ed, stop. Petra ordered as she stood in between both him and Levi. Ed continued to glare at Levi before taking a few steps back. Captain, you're gone too far. Jean yelled. Levi turned to look at the scared and disgusted faces of his squad. Alphonse stepped forward, a disapproving look in his eyes. That was uncalled for, Alphonse said with a stern tone. Alphonse, why did you let those titans live? Levi questioned, taking Alphonse by surprise. When the titan horde came down on us, you went out of your way to make sure you didn't kill them. Did the idea that they were human suddenly stop them from being humanity's greatest threat in your mind? What will you do when we inevitably have to face them once more? Will you try to save them, even when they devour hundreds of our comrades? I didn't give up on myself, so I'm not giving up on them, Alphonse declared. Almost everyone in the room was confused by what Alphonse meant, all except Ed and Aaron, who knew. We'll find another way. Okay, you go find another way while I do what's necessary. Levi replied. Throughout this entire sequence of events his voice never wavered, nor did it get raised, yet nobody but him commanded the authority in the room. What do you see yourselves doing tomorrow? He asked. It was a simple question, yet Will you have food on the table? Will you get a good night's rest, and will those around you be there tomorrow? These aren't things that normal people worry about on a daily basis. That means I'm abnormal, likely because I've seen too many abnormal things. But, if Walrose were breached tomorrow and we faced an emergency, then I'd be faster than any of you to react, to fight. Everyone listened silently as Levi lectured them. I'll fight, even if I have to face the hell of tomorrow again. You're all seen terrible things too, and you might very well see more terrible things tomorrow. Levi pauses for a moment and took a deep breath. I want to end this recurring nightmare, and there are those who would stand in my way. But I'm fine with playing the role of the lunatic who kills people. I have to be ready to rearrange some faces, because the hell of humans killing each other is better than the hell of being eaten. At the very least, not all of humanity will be damned. But if we can quickly seize control of this world, then we could avoid the deaths of a lot of people, and wouldn't that be nice? He walked up to Historia, looking down at her. So Historia, what's it gonna be? Will play your part or stand up and fight me? I don't care which, just choose now, we don't have time. Levi yelled as he knelt down onto the ground to come face to face with her. I'll do it, Historia cried. I'll become the queen. Good, Levi replied, switching back to a calmer tone as he helped Historia from the ground. We'll be counting on you, Historia. Levi shifted his eyes back towards his squad, all of whom had a look of either disapproval or anxiety. Nifa, what were the orders from Erwin? Right, Commander Erwin has set out a 4-stage plan. First, we will proceed with the mission to capture the head of the Interior MPs and interrogate him or her for the location of Rod Rice. The Reeves Company has set up the location and the time for the transfer. Because of what we know and the extent to which the powers Aaron's Titan is capable of, we cannot risk either Aaron or Historia in this operation, and as such they shall remain guarded in their current location. Secondly, once we have uncovered his location, we will leak the information surrounding the powers of the coordinate and its relations to the people of the walls, as well as the Fritz royal family being imposters. Once that has happened, then, hopefully, the royal government will have collapsed and we'd had taken control of the government apparatus with the help of our allies in the garrison, with the full support of the public. Thirdly, we'll apprehend Rod Rice and install Historia Rice as the queen and help in forming a new government. Nifa paused for a second, and finally, the Scout Regiment will aid in establishing the dominance of Historia's rule and sweep away any remnants of the former government, from the Interior MPs to any loyalists' noble lords. The last part lingered in everyone's minds. Sweep away. So it doesn't matter who we work with, we're still dogs of the military. Ed remarked. Do you have a problem with that? Levi questioned. You signed up for the regiment, so you'll do as your commander tells you. Inside the armory, Petra began to inspect her equipment as she prepared for the first stage of Erwin's plan. Petra, Levi called out. Petra turned her head to see Levi standing at the doorway. Sir, Petra replied as she saluted him. What the problem? Levi walked into the armory. I'm placing you in charge of the capture mission. Petra stared at Levi, shocked. You're not going to lead it, why? Petra asked. The way things went during that briefing, I don't think I have their trust at the moment, which could compromise the mission, so I'm asking you to lead them. You can count on me, sir, Petra replied resolutely. Thank you, Levi responded. So, you'll need to organize an away team. Ed has experience with you, so he'll have to come with us. Mikasa is still in recovery, so Alphonse will have to take her place. Jean and Armin will be needed to play as decoys for Aaron and Historia, and finally Mina. Mina? Levi asked. I think she'll be able to prove herself in this operation, Petra replied. It's your call, Levi stated. The rest will help in guarding the castle. They'll show the new guards around. There are new guards coming? Petra asked. Yeah, we got a message from Pixis recently, saying that some of Ian's men are coming to help man the castle. He's on our side, so I believe we can trust them. Organize your team and I'll meet you at the gate. Levi turned back and walked out of the armory. Petra wandered around the castle as she looked for the others. She heard a voice that sounded like Daimo Reeves come from the other side of an open door. She peered through to see Ed and Alphonse explaining to Daimo and Fledgel about Ed's automail leg while Aaron and Historia watched. Hello Petra, Alphonse said as he spotted Petra. Ed and Al, you guys need to get ready, we're moving out soon. Petra said. She turned to Historia, who was sitting quietly. Historia, how are you feeling? I'm fine. She replied with a gloomy expression on her face. What Levi did went too far. Ed said as he rolled his trouser leg down. Yeah, if you hadn't went up to him I'd have done it myself. Fledgel remarked proudly. Everyone in the room looked at Fledgel like he said the most ridiculous thing they'd ever heard. What? Sorry for my idiot son, Lieutenant. Daimo said, look you guys, I know you must be angry at Levi, but when he spoke to me about improving the situation around Trost District and about trusting us, I believe he's telling the truth even when he could just beat us all senseless and get what he wants like that. He knows what it means to have nothing. He's not a bad guy, am I correct in saying that, Lieutenant? Yeah, he's just a bit awkward and blunt at times. Petra replied. If you don't mind me saying this, Lieutenant, Daimo turned to Historia. Missy, sorry, Your Highness, once you become queen, smack him and tell him this, I dare you to hit me back. Petra was taken aback from the request. She was about to say something when both Aaron and Ed began to egg Historia on. Yeah, you should do that. Aaron said, smiling. Get some payback, and the best part is he can't do anything about it. Ed added. Brother. Alphonse said, disapproving of the whole thing. All right, enough of that, Ed and Al, get ready, I want you in your gear and at the gate. Petra ordered. A couple minutes had passed and Petra, along with those she had chosen for the mission, began to enter into the Reeves Company wagon. You got everything? Daimo asked as they seated themselves in the wagon. We're got everything. Petra replied. Good, it's gonna be a long ride. Daimo said as he lowered the tarp over the entrance. Wait for these garrison soldiers to go through. They could hear the sound of horses passing through and the chattering of people around them. You guys okay? She asked as she looked around at the faces of her squad mates. Some looked anxious, others looked calm and collected, while Ed had already begun to fall asleep. Yeah, I'm just glad I just have to wear the wig. Armin replied as he tugged in his raincoat. It's better if we all have ODM gear on. Petra said, the cover story is that they found Aaron and Historia like that. As the wagon began to move, Petra peered through the cover to see the scouts and Captain Levi greeting the garrison soldiers. Levi was shaking one soldier's hand. It was a woman of average height, thin build with blonde hair tied back. The garrison soldier turned her head towards the wagon and Petra could have sworn she saw her and smiled. Ed, Al, and Mina, your job is to handle any of the guards, Petra ordered. She wore a large coat to hide her ODM gear. Keep watch in the trees, I'll stay with Jean and Armin in the mines. Okay. Ed replied. They fired their cables into the trees and reeled themselves upwards. The leaves shook as they brushed past them and landed onto the branches. Ed watched as Petra entered into the mines. He turned to his left, see Alphonse in the next tree, he crouching down onto a high branch watching the road. The sound of horses pulling a carriage caught his attention. From his high vantage point Ed could make it out to be a small black carriage. It stopped at the entrance, the doors opened and a group of 5 men dressed in black came out and greeted the Reeves men at the entrance to the mine. Their black hats covered their faces, hiding themselves from Ed as he tried to get a good look at them. Why did I pick so high a spot? He thought, berating him, I can't see shit. He watched as one of the men entered into the mines as the rest waited outside. That must be our guy. Ed looked over to Alphonse and Mina, who both seemed to be getting ready to take out bodyguards. Petra, Armin, and Jean have to capture the guy. We'll take these guys on. Suddenly the man walked out of the mines along with Daimo Reeves as 2 of the other guys entered the mines. What the? The 2 strolled into the forest. Ed watched as they got closer to the tree he hid in. As they stood underneath it, both he and Al listened in on their conversation. By the way, Reeves, said the man in the black coat. His voice seemed familiar to Ed, like he had heard it before. Do you know a guy named Levi Ackerman? It didn't take long for Ed to realize. You know who that guy was, don't you? Yeah, I did. He recalled that conversation with Levi. But Ackerman? Mikasa, is Levi related to her? Is that guy related to her, to them? The same guy who attacked Mikasa could be related to her. That thought confused Ed. How, when, what? This guy's the head of the Interior MPs? It can't be. Levi Ackerman? Never heard his full name before. Daimo responded, I'm sure everyone has heard of him, he's also the guy looking to kill us since we capture those brats, but you'll do something right. I taught him a lot, said the man. So that's how you know him, Levi. That midget is my pride and joy. In one swift motion the man pulled Daimo Reeves close and sliced open his neck as the two other guards shot the Reeves men standing outside and the sound of more gunshots echoed from within the mines. Oh shit. Ed quickly jumped off his tree branch, he positioned his leg ready to strike at his head. The guy quickly looked up and saw Ed descending on him, the two quickly got a look at each other. He was that guy that attacked them in the alleyway. He quickly raised his arm and blocked Ed's kick. Ed bounced off his arm and onto the ground. Same move? You disappoint me, said the old man as he smiled at Ed. Quickly the two other guards ran towards Ed, coming at him from both sides, when both Alphonse and Mina slammed into them and pinned them to the ground. Mina, go check on the others, Ed yelled. As Mina rushed towards the mines, Ed turned his attention back at the old man. Just who the hell are you? The name's Kenny, he replied. Oh my God, Flegel cried as he knelt over his father's corpse. Did you get him? Petra yelled as she, Armin, Jean and Mina ran up to him and Ed quickly noticed that her blades were dripping in blood. I see you took care of those two, Kenny said as he looked over to Petra. How the hell did you find out? Petra questioned as she raised her blade toward him. I take it Levi's not here, Kenny said. Shame, I wanted to see that little shit again. Answer the question, Petra demanded as she pressed the end of her blade to his neck. Have you ever killed anyone before you killed my men? Kenny asked, developed a taste for it. He deliberately ignored the question. Tell me Missy, did Levi ever teach you about cornering a rat before? What? Petra exclaimed. Cornering a rat. Armin muttered, a frightening realization came to him. Guys, it a trap, he yelled. The violent rustling of the tree's leaves quickly caught their attention as they looked up to see people, dressed in what looked to be ODM gear, fly above them. They don't have blades, Ed thought as he watched them. Those are. Everyone, get down, he yelled as a volley of shots were fired from on high and struck the ground around them. In the confusion, Kenny quickly rushed Ed. He tried to pin him to the ground and raise his knife upwards to stab his hand, but Ed kicked him off with his left leg and sent him back. Kenny cushioned the blow with a quick block, and the two quickly got up to their feet. The rest of the team quickly moved towards cover as tried to avoid the hail of gunfire from the sky. Scatter and pick 'em off, Kenny ordered. He turned back to see Ed, who had taken out his second blade. Leave this runt to me, he said as he readied his knife. Ed, Alphonse yelled as he tried to rush over to his brother. Suddenly he was tackled to the ground by Mina as they narrowed missed the next volley of shots coming from the MPs. Damn it, I missed, yelled one of the MPs. Everyone, prepare to fall back, Petra ordered. Armin, Jean grabbed Flegel. The two had been taking cover behind some trees when they ran over to Flegel. Mina, move in to support Ed. Damn it, we've got nothing to hit back with, Jean yelled. Alphonse watched as Kenny once more rushed towards Ed. His large knife clashed with his blades as the two were locked in a struggle. Al and Mina rushed towards him when the tree they passed suddenly exploded, sending shards of wood towards them, one of which stuck Mina's back as they collapsed back onto the ground. Mina, Al yelled as he quickly got up. He grabbed Mina from under her arm and tried to drag her towards cover. In front of you, Jean yelled, alerting Alphonse. He looked to see three of them flying towards him, their guns pointed at him and Mina. He knew he couldn't react fast enough to transmute when they'd already had their weapons pointed at him, and he couldn't drop Mina and leap out of the way. Had I still been a suit of armor, I wouldn't have to worry about getting shot, he thought grimly. Suddenly a large wall of fire engulfed the MPs coming towards them. The MPs screamed in agony as they were unexpectedly being burned alive, their unbearable pain quickly ceasing as they crashed into the ground. Alphonse turned to see Armin with a matchbox and burnt match in his hands. We have to go, Armin yelled. There was a look of anger on his face. The fire should hold them off. Al turned back towards Ed and Kenny. A wall of fire and burning trees separated him from Alphonse and the others. Ed, Alphonse yelled. Ed kicked Kenny back and took a few steps back himself in an effort to give himself some space. he looked towards Alphonse through the burning trees and shrubbery. Flame alchemy. Armin managed to do it. After those rats. Kenny yelled, "Don't let them escape." On the other side of the forest, which hadn't been set on flames, more of the MPs flew towards them. "Al, just run." Ed yelled, "I'll find another way out." The fire grew in intensity and quickly the sight of his brother was blocked by a thick cloud of black smoke. "You're not going anywhere," said Kenny. Ed turned to see him right just inches away from him. Ed quickly moved to the side as he saw Kenny swing his knife at him. Ed swings his blade at him but Kenny grabs him by the wrist and slashes at a cable connected to his gear. "What the hell?" Kenny then punches Ed in the gut and quickly pries one of the blades from Ed before sending him back with a powerful kick. Ed crashes onto the ground. He could feel the burning heat all around him. He looked up to see Kenny staring at him from the same spot, holding one of his blades. "Now it's a fair fight," Kenny said as he slowly walked towards him. "Show me what you're made of, runt." Ed quickly got up to his feet and glared at Kenny. He gripped the handle of his only blade with both hands. "You're gonna regret that," he yelled as he and Kenny charged towards each other. Check the description for the links to the author.